At the pharmacy counter, I paid for an elderly man's medicine because his card was declined for $12. It was a small act of kindness in a cruel world, or so I thought. He did not say thank you. Instead, he gripped my forearm with a strength that terrified me and whispered into my ear, "After your son leaves this weekend, do not rake the leaves in your garden. Do not touch them." I was confused, but I saw the terror in his eyes, so I listened. The next morning, looking out my front door, I nearly collapsed at what I saw hidden beneath those innocent piles of autumn leaves. My name is Ezekiel Robinson, but everyone who knows the weight of a hammer calls me Zeke. I am 72 years old, and I have lived in Atlanta my entire life. I spent 40 years pouring concrete and laying foundations for skyscrapers that I am not allowed to live in. I built this city with my sweat, and now this city wants to chew me up and spit me out. Before I tell you how my own blood tried to bury me in my own backyard, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight for what is yours against the people who should have protected you. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the humidity in Georgia was thick enough to choke a man. I was standing in line at the CVS on MLK Drive just trying to pick up my blood pressure medication. The line was long and the air conditioning was broken. In front of me stood a man who looked older than God himself. He wore a faded tweed suit that had seen better decades, and he was trembling. The pharmacist, a young girl who looked like she would rather be anywhere else, sighed loudly. "Sir, your card was declined. You are short $12.45. The old man looked down at his shoes. They were polished, but the soles were worn thin. He mumbled something about a pension check being late. The people behind me started shifting their weight, impatient and rude. I felt that familiar heat rise in my chest. Not the heat of the weather, but the heat of injustice. I stepped forward and slapped a $20 bill on the counter. "Put it on my tab," I said. The pharmacist took the money without making eye contact. The old man froze. He took his bag of pills with shaking hands and turned to look at me. I expected a nod, maybe a handshake. Instead, he grabbed my arm. His fingers were like steel claws digging into my flesh. He pulled me close, so close I could smell the stale coffee and fear on his breath. He looked past me out the glass window to the parking lot. I followed his gaze. A white BMW X5 was speeding past the store, ignoring the red light. I knew that car. It belonged to Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. The old man looked back at me, his eyes wide and watery. He said, "I know that car, and I know you, Ezekiel Robinson. Listen to me carefully. When your son and his wife come to your house this weekend, do not let them fool you. And after they leave, do not rake the leaves in your garden. Promise me." I pulled my arm away, thinking he was senile. How did he know my name? How did he know Dante and Tiffany were coming? They had not visited me in 6 months. They were too busy living in their high-rise condo in Buckhead, pretending they were not drowning in debt. I asked him who he was, but he just turned and shuffled away, disappearing into the heat of the afternoon. I stood there holding my own prescription, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I got into my beat-up Ford F-150. It is a 2003 model, rust on the bumper, but the engine runs like a beast. Just like me. I drove home slowly. My house is not a mansion. It is a simple 3-bedroom ranch on 2 acres of land that my father bought when black folks were not supposed to own land in this part of town. Now developers are circling my neighborhood like vultures, waiting for us old folks to die so they can build luxury apartments. I have had offers. Letters in the mail every week offering cash. I burn them all in the fireplace. This land is the only thing I have to leave to Dante, even if he does not deserve it. Dante is my only son. He is 35 years old and has a degree in architecture that I paid for by working double shifts until my back gave out. He is smart, but he is weak. He married Tiffany 5 years ago. Tiffany is a realtor. She is beautiful in a plastic sort of way, and she smiles with her mouth but never with her eyes. She calls me dad, but she says it the same way she would speak to a slow child or a stubborn pet. They live a life they cannot afford. I know this because the creditors call my house looking for Dante. I never tell him. I just hang up. I thought I was protecting him. I was wrong. When I pulled into my driveway, my heart skipped a beat. The white BMW was there, parked right in the middle of my driveway, blocking my path. The old man at the pharmacy was right. They were here. But that was not what made me stop the truck and turn off the engine. It was what they were doing. My yard has two massive oak trees. Every autumn they drop enough leaves to bury a small car. I usually spend weeks raking them into bags. It is hard work, but it keeps me strong. Today, however, I saw Dante and Tiffany in my yard. They were not wearing their usual designer clothes. They were wearing work boots and gloves. They were holding rakes. My son and his wife, who hire a service to walk their dog, were raking my yard. I stepped out of the truck, leaning heavily on my cane. Not because I needed it, but because it is a good weapon if you need one. Dante saw me first. He looked guilty. That is his natural state around me. He dropped the rake and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Hey, Pops," he said, his voice cracking a little. "We thought we would come by and surprise you, help you out with the yard work. You know at your age you should not be out here in this heat." Tiffany walked over, her smile plastered on tight. She kissed my cheek, and she smelled of expensive perfume and sweat. "Dad, you look tired. Why didn't you tell us the yard was getting this bad? It is a fire hazard. We are just tidying up for you. We want the place to look nice for—" She paused for a split second. "For the season." I looked at the piles of leaves. They had raked them into 4 very specific large mounds, one in each corner of the property, and one massive pile right near the back porch. The piles were neat, too neat, and they were heavy. The way the leaves settled, it looked like there was something solid underneath them. The old man's voice echoed in my head. "Do not rake the leaves." I looked at Dante. He was avoiding my eyes, focusing intently on a spot of grass near his boot. "Why now?" I asked. My voice was low and gravelly. "You have not visited since Christmas. Now you are here on a Tuesday raking leaves. Do you need money, Dante?" Tiffany laughed, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Dad, do not be silly. We are doing well. Dante just got a big project. We just wanted to do something nice for you. Is it a crime to help our father?" She put her hand on my shoulder. Her nails were manicured sharp and red. "Listen, Dad. We are going to finish up here. Why don't you go inside and rest? We ordered some barbecue. It will be here soon. But promise me one thing. Don't touch these piles, okay? The sanitation truck won't come until Monday. If you spread them out again, we will just have to do all this work over. Just let them sit. Let us take care of you for once. Let us take care of you." Those words should have been comforting. Instead, they sounded like a threat. I looked at the piles of leaves again. They were shaped like graves, shallow graves. I walked past them up the steps to my porch. I felt their eyes boring into my back. I went inside and locked the deadbolt. I did not eat the barbecue. I watched from the window as they finished their work. They were meticulous. They patted down the leaves, ensuring they covered every inch of whatever was underneath. When they finally left, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. I sat in my armchair in the dark. The house was silent, but my mind was screaming. Who was the man at the pharmacy? How did he know? And what exactly was my son hiding in my own backyard? I waited until I saw their taillights disappear around the bend. Then I grabbed my flashlight and my cane. I opened the front door. The wind was picking up, rustling the leaves. It sounded like whispering. I walked down the steps. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I approached the nearest pile, the one close to the property line. I raised my cane, ready to push the leaves aside. But then my phone rang. The sound was so loud in the quiet night that I jumped. I pulled it out of my pocket. It was an unknown number. I answered it. "Do not touch it," the voice on the other end rasped. It was him, the man from the pharmacy. "They are watching you, Zeke. There is a camera in the birdhouse. Look at the mailbox first. Look at what they put inside the mailbox." I hung up. I shone my flashlight toward the old wooden birdhouse hanging on the oak tree. Sure enough, there was a faint red light blinking in the darkness. A lens. They were watching me. My own son was spying on me. I turned and walked to the mailbox at the end of the driveway. My hands were shaking just like the old man's hands had been. I opened the metal door and reached inside. There was no mail, just a single heavy envelope. It was not stamped. It had been placed there by hand. I tore it open. Inside was a glossy brochure. On the cover was a digital rendering of a sleek modern apartment complex, glass and steel, soulless. I shone my light on the text at the bottom. It read, "Coming soon, the Oasis Luxury Condominiums. Location." I stopped breathing. The address listed for the location was not down the street. It was not across town. The address listed was 4502 Martin Luther King Drive. That was my address. That was my home. And then I saw the date on the brochure. Construction begins Monday. I looked back at the yard at the mounds of leaves. They weren't cleaning up. They were marking territory. I walked over to the pile near the porch, ignoring the blinking red light in the birdhouse. I didn't care if they saw me now. I used the handle of my cane to sweep away the top layer of wet leaves. I gasped. The air left my lungs. Underneath the leaves was not grass. Driven deep into the soil of my ancestors was a bright orange survey stake, and tied to it was a yellow plastic ribbon that read Property Boundary, Phase 1 Demolition. They hadn't just sold my house. They were planning to tear it down while I was still sleeping inside. I fell to my knees, clutching the dirt. The betrayal tasted like bile in my throat. But as I knelt there in the dark, a new feeling replaced the shock. It was cold. It was hard. It was the feeling of 40 years of concrete hardening in my veins. My son thought I was a frail old man who would just fade away. He thought he could bury me under a pile of leaves and lies. He was about to find out that you should never dig a grave for a man who is still holding a shovel. I stood up and looked directly into the camera lens in the birdhouse. I did not smile. I simply nodded. The war had begun. It had been 6 months since my son Dante last stepped foot in this house. Usually I get a text message on my birthday or a generic card signed by his wife's assistant during the holidays. But today was different. Today, they rolled up my driveway in that white BMW like royalty visiting a peasant subject. Dante was holding a bottle of red wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. Tiffany was carrying a ceramic roasting pan that smelled of rosemary and lemon. They were smiling, both of them. And that was the most terrifying thing I had seen all year. The old man at the pharmacy had warned me, but seeing them here in the flesh made my stomach turn. I stood at the screen door, leaning on my cane, watching them approach. Dante looked good, I had to admit that. He was tall like me, but he didn't have my shoulders. He had the soft hands of an architect, hands that held pencils and computer mice, not hammers and shovels. He was wearing designer jeans and boots that had clearly never touched mud. Tiffany was right behind him in a floral dress that looked too expensive for a Sunday visit to the south side of Atlanta. "Hey, Pop," Dante called out, his voice too loud, too cheerful. "We brought dinner. Tiffany made her famous roast chicken. We thought we would surprise you." I opened the door and stepped aside. "Surprise is one word for it," I said, keeping my face neutral. "Come on in." They bustled into my kitchen, filling the space with their noise and their expensive perfume. My kitchen has not changed since my wife Sarah passed away 10 years ago. The yellow linoleum is peeling in the corners and the cabinets are old oak, but it is clean. Tiffany looked around with that familiar expression of polite disgust she always tries to hide. "Oh, Dad," she said, setting the chicken on the table. "It is so cozy in here. But really, we need to talk about getting you some new appliances. This stove looks like a fire hazard." She was already starting. The critique. The subtle push that I was too old and too poor to maintain my own castle. I sat down at the head of the table. I did not offer them a drink. I waited. We ate in an uncomfortable silence. The chicken was dry, but I ate it. Dante poured the wine. He kept checking his watch. He looked nervous. He kept tapping his foot against the table leg, a habit he has had since he was a boy, lying about his homework. So Pop Dante started clearing his throat. "The place is looking rustic. The garden, though, it is getting a bit wild out there, isn't it?" I looked him in the eye. "It is autumn, Dante. Trees drop leaves. That is what they do." Tiffany chimed in, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. "Yes, but Dad, it is dangerous. All those dry leaves piled up. One spark and this whole wooden house could go up in flames. We worry about you. We really do. With your bad hip, we know you can't rake them yourself." I cut a piece of chicken slowly. "I can rake just fine," I said. "No, no," Tiffany insisted, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Her skin was cold. "We were thinking we should hire a landscaping crew, a professional team to come in and clear everything out, strip it down to the bare dirt so it is safe." I saw Dante flinch. That was not the script. "No, Tiff," Dante said quickly. "No crew. I will do it. I want to do it." Tiffany looked at him sharp and warning. "Honey, you have that meeting tomorrow. You don't want to ruin your clothes." "I want to do this for Pop," Dante said, and for a second I almost believed him. Almost. "I want to take care of the yard today. Just us. We can clear it all up, make it look presentable. presentable for who I asked. Dante froze. For you, Pop. Just for you. After lunch, they didn't even wait for coffee. They went straight to the garage and found my old rakes. I sat on the back porch in my rocking chair nursing a glass of iced tea and watching them. It was a bizarre sight. My son in his $300 jeans raking leaves sweating through his dress shirt. Tiffany had put on a pair of my old gardening gloves which were comical on her small hands. But as I watched, the fear from the pharmacy returned. They were not raking randomly. Usually when you clean a yard, you rake everything toward the street for collection, or you mulch it in the back. They were not doing that. Tiffany was directing the operation. She pointed to the far left corner of the yard near the old oak tree. Pile them there, she commanded. Then she pointed to the far right corner exactly where the property line meets the neighbor's fence. And another pile there. They were building mounds, 4 massive mounds of leaves, 1 in each corner of the lot and 2 specifically placed near the foundation of the house. It looked less like cleaning and more like geometry. I pretended to doze off. I let my head drop to my chest and I slowed my breathing. I watched through the slit of my eyelids. Thinking I was asleep, the dynamic changed. The fake smiles dropped. Tiffany stopped raking. She walked over to her oversized leather handbag which she had left on the patio table. She looked back at me, checking to see if I was watching. I kept my breathing steady, loud, and rhythmic. She reached into the bag and pulled out something long and thin. It was bright orange. From where I sat, it looked like a stick. She walked quickly over to the mound of leaves Dante had just finished in the east corner. She knelt down. Dante stopped raking. He looked at her and I saw him mouth the words, "Are you sure?" Tiffany hissed something back at him. She took the orange stick and drove it into the ground. She used a small mallet she had pulled from her bag. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was muffled by the wind, but I felt it in my bones. Once the stick was in the ground, she frantically kicked leaves over it, burying it completely under the mound. She stood up, dusted off her hands, and gave Dante a thumbs up. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I knew what that was. I worked construction for 40 years. I know a survey stake when I see one. You put those in the ground when you are marking property lines for a subdivision. You put those in when you are about to sell a piece of land to a developer. They were not cleaning my yard. They were marking the boundaries for the bulldozers. They repeated the process at the other 3 corners. Rake a huge pile. Check to see if the old man is asleep. Drive the stake into the ground. Cover it with leaves. It took them 3 hours. By the time they were finished, the sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long orange shadows across the yard. The garden looked ridiculous. It wasn't clean. It was just dotted with 6 enormous, ominous piles of dead leaves. Dante came up the porch steps, wiping dirt from his face. He looked exhausted and miserable. Tiffany looked triumphant. "Dad," she called out loudly, startling me from my fake nap. "Dad, wake up. We are all done." I opened my eyes and looked at them. The betrayal tasted like copper in my mouth. "You are finished?" I asked. "Yes," Dante said, grabbing a bottle of water. "It looks much better now, right, Pop? Safer." Tiffany walked over and stood right in front of me, blocking my view of the yard. "Now listen, Dad, this is important. We piled them up like that because the city has a new collection policy. They need the leaves condensed." Lies. The city collects leaves in biodegradable bags. They never ask for loose piles. So she continued, her voice dropping to that patronizing tone again. "You must not touch those piles. Do not let the dog out. Do not go poking around in them with your cane. If you spread them out, the trucks won't take them, and we will get fined. Do you understand?" I gripped my cane tight, my knuckles turning white. "I understand, Tiffany. Leave the piles alone." "Good," she smiled, patting my cheek. "We will call the collection service. They are coming Monday morning. So you just relax this weekend. Stay inside, watch some TV." Dante wouldn't look at me. He was staring at his boots, which were now ruined with mud. "We should go, Tiff," he mumbled. "Traffic will be bad." They packed up their things quickly. The roasting pan, the expensive wine bottle, which was still half full. They didn't hug me goodbye. They just waved from the driveway. "Love you, Pop," Dante called out, but the words sounded hollow, like they were coming from the bottom of a well. I watched the white BMW back out of the driveway. As soon as they were gone, the silence of the evening settled over the house. But it wasn't peaceful. The yard felt different now. It felt violated. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. The 6 piles of leaves sat there like silent sentinels in the twilight. Underneath them were the orange stakes, the teeth of the beast that was coming to eat my home. Monday morning. That was the deadline. They thought they had tricked me. They thought I was just a senile old man who would obey orders and watch TV while they sold my life out from under me. I looked at the sky. The clouds were gathering. A storm was coming. Good. I like storms. I went back inside and locked the door. I didn't turn on the TV. Instead, I went to the hall closet and pulled down my old dusty toolbox. I took out a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters and a flashlight. Tiffany said not to touch the piles. She said wait for the garbage truck. Well, I have never been good at waiting for people to take out my trash. Sometimes you have to take out the trash yourself. I waited for night to fall completely. Then I opened the back door. The wind whispered through the trees, repeating the old man's warning. Don't rake the leaves. I won't rake them, I whispered back. I am going to dig. The silence in my house that night was heavy enough to crush a man. After the taillights of my son's BMW disappeared around the curve of the road, I locked the deadbolt and leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. I listened to the house settling around me. The creak of the floorboards in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog down the street. These were the sounds I had lived with for 40 years. They usually brought me comfort. Tonight they sounded like a countdown. I tried to sit in my armchair. I tried to read the newspaper, but my eyes kept drifting to the window. Outside, the darkness had swallowed the yard, but I knew what was out there. Those 6 mounds of leaves. They bothered me. They itched at my brain like a splinter under the skin. It wasn't just suspicion, it was pride. My father taught me that a job worth doing is worth doing right. You don't leave piles of trash sitting in your yard like open wounds. You bag them, you mulch them, you finish the job. Seeing my garden, the land I had paid for with blood and sweat, looking so chaotic made my skin crawl. It felt disrespectful. It felt like my son had come into my sanctuary and left his dirty footprints all over the altar. Tiffany said to leave them alone. She said wait for the city trucks. But since when did Ezekiel Robinson wait for another man to clean up his mess? Since when did I take orders from a woman who has never had a callus on her hand in her life? I stood up and paced the kitchen. My hip was aching, a dull throb that warned of rain coming. I rubbed the joint and looked at the clock on the stove. It was only 9:30. The night was young. The urge to go out there was overwhelming. Just to check, just to maybe bag up one pile, just to make it look decent. If I did it carefully, they would never know. I could bag the leaves and leave the bags in the same spots. That would be better, right? Safer, cleaner. But then I froze, my hand hovering over the back door handle. I saw the face of the old man from the pharmacy again. I saw the terror in his watery eyes, the way he gripped my arm with that desperate strength. He wasn't crazy. I have seen crazy. I have seen men lose their minds on construction sites from heat stroke or drugs. This man was not crazy. He was terrified. And he was specific. He didn't just say, watch out. He said, do not rake the leaves. Why? Why would a stranger care about my lawn maintenance? How did he know Dante was coming? How did he know about the weekend? The questions spun in my head, making me dizzy. I walked to the sink and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. Gray stubble, deep lines around my mouth, eyes that had seen too much. Am I the crazy one? Am I turning into a paranoid old man who thinks his own family is out to get him? Maybe Dante really was just trying to help. Maybe he really did want to do something nice for me and I was twisting it into something dark because I was lonely and bitter. Maybe the old man at the pharmacy was just a confused soul who mistook me for someone else. I shook my head. No, my gut has never lied to me. My gut told me to wear a helmet the day a steel beam fell 2 inches from my head in '85. My gut told me to invest in this land when everyone said the neighborhood was dying. My gut was screaming at me now. I needed to know. I couldn't sleep not with this question mark hanging over my property. I went to the utility closet and grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight. The mag light. It weighed 3 pounds and felt solid in my hand. A light and a weapon all in one. I unlocked the back door. The air outside had changed. The humidity had broken, and a cool wind was whipping through the trees. It was the leading edge of a storm front. The wind hissed through the branches of the oak trees, sounding like hushed voices. I stepped out onto the porch. The motion sensor light flickered and died. Of course, another thing I needed to fix. I clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness sharp and white. I swept it across the yard. The piles of leaves were there, shifting slightly in the wind. They looked like sleeping beasts. I walked down the steps, my cane thumping rhythmically on the wood. I headed toward the pile closest to the house, the one right next to my wife's old rose bushes. The wind picked up, tossing dead leaves into the air. They danced in the beam of my flashlight. As I got closer, I saw something. The wind had blown the top layer of the mound loose. Just a little. But it was enough. Lying there half buried under the brown, decaying oak leaves was a flash of color. It wasn't brown. It wasn't green. It was a bright, unnatural orange. I stopped. My heart hammered against my ribs. It looked like paper. Or maybe plastic. It was sticking out of the dirt like a tongue mocking me. I moved closer. The beam of my light focused on that spot of orange. It looked like the corner of a document, a piece of paper that had been shoved hastily under the leaves and pinned down with a rock or a stick. Why would there be paper under the leaves? Did they drop something? Did Tiffany lose a contract, or was it something else? I reached out with my hand. My fingers were inches away from the cold, damp leaves. I needed to see it. I needed to know what my son was hiding. If I just pulled it out, I would have my answer. I leaned forward, my knees protesting in the damp air. Just as my fingertips brushed against the rough surface of a dead leaf, the silence of the night was shattered. Ringing, loud, shrill, and demanding. I jumped back, nearly dropping my flashlight. It was my cell phone in my breast pocket. The sound echoed in the empty yard, making the neighbor's dog start barking. My heart was in my throat. Who would be calling me at this hour? I pulled the phone out with trembling hands. The screen was bright, blinding in the darkness. Unknown number. I stared at it. A feeling of dread washed over me, colder than the wind. I pressed the answer button and held the phone to my ear. I didn't say hello. I just listened. Zeke. The voice was raspy, breathless. It was him, the man from the pharmacy. Zeke, don't touch it. Do not touch that pile. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the darkness of the trees. Where are you? I whispered, my voice shaking. Are you watching me? They are watching you, Zeke, the voice hissed. There is a camera in the birdhouse. I told you. If you touch that pile, they will know. They are waiting for you to mess it up so they can say you are incompetent. So they can say you are destroying evidence. Evidence of what I asked. I looked back at the orange paper peeking out from the leaves. What is under there? Not yet, the old man said. Not yet. Listen to me. Turn around. Walk away from the leaves. Go to your mailbox. My mailbox. It's empty, I said. I checked it this morning. Check it again, he commanded. Look at what they put inside while you were inside eating that dry chicken. Look at the return address. Look at the dates. I hesitated. The orange paper was right there. I could just grab it. Do not do it, Zeke, the voice pleaded. It is a trap. If you move the leaves, they win. Go to the mailbox. Now. The line went dead. I stood there in the wind, the phone still pressed to my ear. I looked at the camera lens hidden in the birdhouse. A tiny red light blinked once. They were watching. My son and his wife were probably sitting in their condo right now, watching a live feed of their father standing in the yard like a confused old fool. I lowered the flashlight. I didn't touch the leaves. I turned my back on the pile and the secret it held. I began the long walk down the driveway to the mailbox. The gravel crunched under my boots. The wind howled louder. I didn't know what I would find in that metal box, but I knew one thing. The war had started, and I was already behind enemy lines. The sun rose over Atlanta that morning with a deceptive beauty. It was a pale, watery light that filtered through the blinds of my living room, painting stripes across the floor where I had paced all night. I had not slept, not for a single minute. The old man's warning echoed in my ears louder than the wind that had howled against the siding until just before dawn. Do not rake the leaves, do not touch them. I drank my coffee black and standing up. My hand trembled slightly as I brought the mug to my lips, not from age, but from a rage that was simmering deep in my gut. It was a cold, hard rage, the kind that settles in your marrow. When the sun finally fully broke the horizon, I set the mug down in the sink. The house was silent. It felt different today. It felt temporary, like a hotel room I was overdue to check out of. I walked to the back door and unlocked it. The heavy click of the deadbolt sounded like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. I pushed the screen door open and stepped out onto the porch. The air was crisp and smelled of rain and wet earth. The storm had passed, but it had left its mark. The wind had been my ally in the night. While I paced and worried, the wind had been out here working, stripping away the lies my son had so carefully constructed. I looked out at the yard and I felt the breath leave my lungs in a sharp hiss. The neat mounds of leaves that Dante and Tiffany had built yesterday were gone. In their place were scattered remnants blown apart by the gusts. The disguise had been stripped away, and what was left underneath made my knees buckle. The yard, my sanctuary for 40 years, looked like a crime scene. Jutting out of the earth in the four corners of my property were bright neon orange stakes. They were ugly, violent slashes of color against the brown and green of the garden. They weren't just sticks. I knew what they were. I had spent a lifetime on construction sites. These were professional surveyor stakes, the kind used to mark boundaries for subdivision, the kind used to slice up a hole into profitable little parts. I gripped the railing of the porch so hard a splinter dug into my palm, but I didn't feel it. I forced my legs to move. I walked down the steps and across the wet grass toward the nearest stake. My boots sank into the softened earth. When I reached the east corner near the old pecan tree, I looked down. The stake was driven deep. A piece of yellow plastic flagging tape whipped in the breeze. On the wood, someone had written in thick black marker, Lot A. I turned slowly, looking across the expanse of my land. In the far corner, Lot B, near the fence, Lot C, and the section closest to the driveway, Lot D. They hadn't just sold the house, they had subdivided the land. They had carved up the earth my father bought with his factory wages and turned it into 4 parcels of real estate. They were going to cram 4 units onto the soil where my wife grew her tomatoes. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't a sale, it was an erasure. They were going to wipe away every trace that Ezekiel Robinson had ever lived here. But the horror wasn't over. My eyes were drawn to the spot near the back porch, the place where Tiffany had piled the leaves the highest, the place she had been so adamant I stay away from. The wind had done the most damage there. The leaves had been scoured away, revealing a large, flat object lying face down in the dirt. It looked like a piece of plywood, heavy, deliberate. I walked over to it. My heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I knew what it was before I touched it. I knew why they had covered it. I knew why they had raked with such desperation. I hooked the handle of my cane under the edge of the board and pried it up. It was heavy, sodden with moisture. I had to bend down and use my hands, getting mud on my fingers. I didn't care. I heaved the board over and let it splash back into the mud face up. The letters were bold and red. They screamed at me. Sold. Future site of Oasis, luxury condos. Phase 1. Demolition begins Monday. I stared at the sign. I read the words over and over again, trying to make them make sense. Future site. Demolition. Monday. Monday was tomorrow. The realization hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. This wasn't a plan for the future. This wasn't something they were thinking about. This was a done deal. The ink was dry. The money had changed hands. My son had stood right here yesterday. He had stood on this spot wearing those expensive jeans, and he had smiled at me. He had looked me in the eye and said he wanted to help me clean the yard. He had lied to my face while standing on top of his own betrayal. He wasn't raking leaves. He was burying the evidence. He was hiding the sign that announced my death sentence. They knew. They all knew. The surveyors had been here. The realtors had been here. The buyers had been here. Everyone knew that Ezekiel Robinson was being evicted except Ezekiel Robinson. I looked at the date on the bottom corner of the sign in small print. The closing date was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, I had been living in a house I no longer owned. For 3 weeks, I had been tending a garden that belonged to a corporation. I remembered the phone call from Dante 3 weeks ago. He had sounded happy. He said he had come into some money, a bonus at work. He asked if I needed anything. I told him I was fine. He was celebrating. He was probably popping champagne with Tiffany, toasting to the sale of the old man's burden. I felt a tear, hot and angry, slide down my cheek. I wiped it away furiously with my muddy hand, leaving a streak of dirt on my face. I looked up at the house. My house. The paint was peeling a bit on the trim and the gutters needed cleaning, but it was strong. It was built with good bones. I remembered the day I carried Sarah across the threshold. I remembered the day we brought Dante home from the hospital. I remembered the day Sarah died in the back bedroom, the way the light hit the quilt she had made. All of that was going to be demolished on Monday. The wind gusted again, rattling the sign against the ground. It sounded like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. I wasn't just a father being disrespected. I was a squatter. In the eyes of the law, in the eyes of the city, I was trespassing on private property. That was their plan. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind. The sudden visit, the yard work, the warning not to touch the leaves. If I had stayed inside like a good, obedient invalid, the bulldozers would have shown up on Monday morning. I would have come out in my bathrobe, confused and terrified. The foreman would have shown me the papers. The police would have been called. They would have seen a senile old man shouting about owning a house that was legally sold weeks ago. Dante and Tiffany would have rushed in playing the heroes. They would have told the police, "Oh, I am so sorry, officer. Our father is confused. His dementia is getting worse. We didn't have the heart to tell him. We will take him to the facility now." It was a setup. A perfect, seamless setup to strip me of my home and my freedom in one morning. They didn't just want the money. They wanted me out of the way. They wanted me in a home where I couldn't make noise, where I couldn't fight back, where I would just fade away into a medicated silence. I looked at the birdhouse in the oak tree, the camera. They were watching. They probably saw me flip the sign. They knew the game was up. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't answer it. I knew who it was. It would be Dante trying to spin a new web of lies. Or maybe Tiffany trying to threaten me. I let it ring. I stood there in the mud surrounding by the orange stakes that marked the end of my world. But as I stood there, something strange happened. The nausea faded, the shock receded, and in its place, that cold, hard resolve from the night before returned. They forgot who I am. They forgot that before I was a retiree, before I was a widower, before I was a disappointment to my social climbing children, I was a foreman. I ran crews of 200 men. I built foundations that held up 50 stories of steel and glass. I know how to read a blueprint. And more importantly, I know how to spot a crack in the foundation. And this plan of theirs, as cruel and elaborate as it was, had a crack. They assumed I was weak. They assumed I was alone. They assumed I would just lay down and let the machinery roll over me. I looked down at the sign again. Oasis Condos. I spit on the ground right next to the word Oasis. I grabbed the sign with both hands. It was heavy, awkward, but I lifted it. I didn't flip it back over to hide it. I propped it up against the porch railing facing the street, facing the world. If they wanted a sign, let them have a sign. I walked back into the house, leaving my muddy boot prints on the clean kitchen floor. I didn't care about the mud anymore. I went straight to the drawer where I kept my address book. I flipped through the pages, past the doctors, past the pharmacy, past the names of friends who had died years ago. I found the name I was looking for, Abernathy. I didn't know the man from the pharmacy, but he knew me. And he knew the system. He was the first crack in their plan. I picked up the landline phone. I dialed the number the old man had whispered to me in my head. It rang 3 times. "Hello?" A voice answered. It was him. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice steady and calm. "This is Zeke Robinson." The wind blew the leaves away. There was a pause on the other end, then a low chuckle. "I figured it might," he said. "Did you see the stakes?" "I saw them," I replied. "And the sign. They are coming Monday." "Then we don't have much time," Abernathy said. "But we have enough. Are you ready to fight Zeke?" I looked out the window at the orange scar on my land. "I am not just ready to fight," I said. "I am ready to go to war. Tell me what I need to do." I hung up the phone. I went to the refrigerator and took out the leftover roast chicken Tiffany had brought. I threw it in the trash. Then I went to my closet and took out my good suit, the one I wore to funerals, because on Monday someone was going down. But it wasn't going to be me. I did not call my son. A younger man might have picked up the phone and screamed until his throat was raw. A weaker man might have begged for an explanation. But I am Ezekiel Robinson. I have survived race riots, economic recessions, and the death of the only woman I ever loved. I do not beg, and I do not warn my enemies when I am coming for them. I put on my work boots, not the clean ones I wear to church, but the scuffed steel-toed leather boots that still have concrete dust in the seams from 1998. I walked out to my truck. The Ford F-150 groaned as I turned the key, but it started. It always starts. It is loyal, unlike my flesh and blood. I drove out of my driveway past the overturned sign that declared my home a future construction site. I didn't look back. I headed toward the address Abernathy had given me over the phone. He lived in the West End, an old neighborhood that was fighting the same battle I was. Every other house was renovated, painted gray, and sold to young white couples with small dogs. But Abernathy's house stood defiant. It was a brick bungalow with overgrown ivy and peeling paint sandwiched between two modern remodels. I parked on the street. The sun was fully up now, beating down on the asphalt. I walked up the path, and before I could even knock, the door opened. Abernathy was smaller than I remembered from the pharmacy. Without his coat, he looked frail, his shoulders hunched under a cardigan that was too warm for the weather. But his eyes were sharp. They were the eyes of a man who had spent a lifetime reading fine print. "Come in, Zeke," he said, stepping aside. "I have the coffee on, and I have the papers." His house was a maze. Stacks of file boxes lined the hallway. Newspapers were piled on every surface. It smelled of old paper and dust. He led me to a small dining table that was cleared of clutter. In the center sat a thick manila folder. I sat down. My hands were steady, but my heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "Who are you, Abernathy?" I asked. "You aren't just a man buying pills at CVS." He poured 2 cups of black coffee. He didn't sit. He stood by the window, peeking through the blinds at the street. "I worked for the city planning department for 35 years, Zeke. I was the senior clerk of records. Every permit, every zoning change, every demolition order crossed my desk. I retired 5 years ago, but I still have friends inside. I still have access to the digital archives. And I still know a rat when I smell one." He tapped the folder on the table. "Your daughter-in-law, Tiffany. She is not just a realtor. She is a predator. I have seen her name on a dozen applications in the last 2 years. She targets the elderly. She targets the widows and the widowers in gentrifying zip codes. But with you, she did something different, something bolder." I opened the folder. The first page was a copy of a city zoning application. It was dated 3 weeks ago. It requested the rezoning of my property from single-family residential to multi-unit commercial. I looked at the signature at the bottom. It wasn't mine. It wasn't a forgery of my name either. It was signed Tiffany Robinson. I looked up at Abernathy. "How can she sign this? The deed is in my name. The house is paid off. She has no rights to this land." Abernathy sighed, a long rattling sound. "Turn the page, Zeke." I turned the page. And that is when the world stopped spinning. It was a legal document, a petition for emergency guardianship. In the state of Georgia, guardianship is a serious thing. It strips a person of their rights. It says they are no longer capable of making decisions for themselves. It says they are children in the eyes of the law. I read the text. It stated that Ezekiel Robinson was suffering from advanced cognitive decline. It claimed I was a danger to myself and others. It claimed I had been found wandering the streets confused. It claimed I had started accidental fires in my kitchen. Lies. All lies. I have never wandered. I have never started a fire. I cook my own meals every damn day. But it was the next document that made me want to vomit. It was a medical evaluation. Patient name, Ezekiel Robinson. Diagnosis, dementia, level 3, severe. Notes. Patient exhibits aggression, paranoia, and complete loss of short-term memory. Patient is incontinent and requires 24-hour supervision. Recommended course of action: immediate transfer to a secure memory care facility. Transfer of all financial and legal authority to next of kin. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the medical report. Dr. Julian Sterling. I have never met a Dr. Julian Sterling. My doctor is Dr. Evans. I have seen him for 20 years. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I felt dirty. I felt violated. Reading these words was worse than being punched. They had taken my dignity, my mind, my history, and erased it with a few keystrokes. They painted me as a drooling idiot who wet himself and didn't know his own name. Abernathy sat down opposite me. Dr. Sterling is a psychiatrist who lost his license in Florida for insurance fraud. He moved here a year ago. He runs a clinic that is little more than a rubber stamp factory for people like Tiffany. She pays him $500 and he signs whatever she wants. He never met you, Zeke. He reviewed your file, which Tiffany provided. I slammed my fist on the table, making the coffee cups jump. "This is illegal." "This is fraud." "It is," Abernathy agreed. "But in the eyes of the city right now, it is fact. That order was granted by a judge 3 weeks ago. An emergency order. They probably told the judge you were too sick to appear in court. They probably said bringing you in would cause you distress. The judge signed it because the paperwork looked perfect." He pointed a bony finger at the date. "See this? This order makes Tiffany your legal guardian. She didn't forge your signature on the sale documents, Zeke. She signed them as you. Legally, she is you. She has the power to sell your house, empty your bank accounts, and commit you to an institution. And she has already done 2 of those things. I sat back in the chair, feeling the room spin. My son, my own son. He knew about this. He had to. He stood in my kitchen yesterday and drank my wine while knowing that on paper I was already a ghost. He wasn't protecting me. He was compliant. He was waiting for the men in white coats to come and take me away so he wouldn't have to look me in the eye when the bulldozers arrived. That is why they wanted you to stay inside, Abernathy said softly. That is why they didn't want you touching the leaves. If you went out and made a scene, the neighbors might realize you are lucid. If you saw the survey stakes, you might call the police. And if the police came and saw a sane man standing on his own property, the whole scheme would crumble. They needed you calm, quiet, and oblivious until Monday morning. On Monday, the demolition crew arrives, and with them, a transport van from the facility. They plan to take you straight from your bed to a locked room at the Silver Lake Memory Care Center. Silver Lake. I knew that place. It was a warehouse for the dying, a place where old folks were sedated until they stopped breathing. I looked at my hands. They were strong. They were steady. I was not incontinent. I was not confused. I was furious. So I am a prisoner, I said, in my own life. No, Abernathy said. You are a victim of a crime, but we have to prove it, and we have to be fast. He pulled another paper from a stack. This is the weak link, Zeke, the medical report. If we can prove that you are of sound mind, then the guardianship is void. If the guardianship is void, the sale is void. And if the sale is void, Tiffany goes to prison for fraud. But how, I asked. It is Saturday. The courts are closed. The city offices are closed. Abernathy smiled a thin, grim smile. The courts are closed, yes, but the hospital is open, and records are forever. We need to go to the hospital where Dr. Sterling claims he examined you. We need to get the official logs. We need to prove that on the day and time he claims he was evaluating your mental state, you were somewhere else. I looked at the date on the report again. October 15th, 2:00 p.m. I closed my eyes. October 15th. Where was I? I smiled. A cold, hard smile. October 15th, I said, opening my eyes. I was at the DMV renewing my driver's license. Abernathy's eyebrows shot up. You are sure? I reached for my wallet and pulled out my license. I tossed it on the table. Issue date, October 15th. I was there for 3 hours. I took the eye test. I took the written test because I turned 70, and I passed with a perfect score. You can't get a license if you have dementia, and you certainly can't be in 2 places at once. Abernathy clapped his hands together. That is it. That is the smoking gun. The DM5 has cameras. They have time-stamped records. But there is a problem, I said. Tiffany has the legal power to stop me. If she finds out I am trying to access my records or hire a lawyer, she can use this guardianship paper to have the police detain me. She can say I am having an episode. Then we don't let her find out. Abernathy said. We move in the shadows. But first we need more than just the license. We need the official medical records from the hospital database showing that you were never admitted. And for that we need to go to St. Jude's where Sterling claims he has privileges. I stood up. I felt lighter. The confusion was gone. I had a target now. I wasn't fighting a ghost. I was fighting a lie. Let's go, I said. Abernathy hesitated. Zeke, if we go down there and they run your name, the system will flag you as a ward of the state. They might call Tiffany. She is listed as your emergency contact. Let them call her, I said, buttoning my jacket. Let her think I am at the hospital. Let her think I am sick. It will make her confident. And a confident enemy is a careless enemy. We walked out to my truck. The heat was rising again. I looked at the old man shuffling next to me. Why are you doing this, Abernathy? I asked. You don't owe me anything. He stopped and looked at the modern condos looming over the street. They took my sister's house last year, he said quietly. Same scam, different realtor. She died in a state-run facility 3 weeks after they evicted her. She died of a broken heart, Zeke. I couldn't save her, but I will be damned if I let them take another one. I nodded. We understood each other. We were the discarded men, the ones society said were done, but we weren't done. We were just getting started. I started the engine. The hunt was on, and I knew exactly where to dig. St. Jude's Hospital smelled like bleach and bad news. It was a smell I knew well. I had spent weeks here sitting in plastic chairs while my wife, Sarah, faded away. But today I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to fight. Abernathy walked beside me, his breathing heavy but his pace steady. We didn't look like a threat. We looked like two old men confused by the automatic doors. That was our camouflage. We marched straight to the reception desk of the psychiatric wing. The woman behind the glass didn't even look up. She was typing on a computer, her long acrylic nails clicking like hail on a tin roof. "Excuse me," I said, my voice low and controlled. "I need to speak with Dr. Julian Sterling." She stopped typing and looked me up and down. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "I don't need an appointment," I said. "I need my records. My name is Ezekiel Robinson. According to your system, I was evaluated here 3 weeks ago. I want to see the log." She frowned, tapping a few keys. "Robinson. Ah, yes. Dr. Sterling is the attending physician. But sir, these records are sealed. They can only be released to the legal guardian." The words hit me like a physical blow. Legal guardian. She was looking at a screen that said I was property, a piece of luggage to be managed. "Call him out here," I demanded. "Tell Dr. Sterling that his patient is here and he is miraculously cured." She reached for the phone, looking nervous now. "Sir, you need to lower your voice." "I will not lower my voice," I boomed. My voice echoed off of the sterile white walls. People in the waiting room turned to stare. Good. Let them look. Let them see a man fighting for his life. A moment later, a door buzzed open. A man stepped out. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40. He wore a white coat that was too clean and a smile that was too practiced. He had the kind of face that you see on billboards for personal injury lawyers. This was Dr. Sterling, the man who had sold my freedom for $500. "Mr. Robinson," he said, smoothing his tie, "you seem agitated. This is exactly the kind of behavior we discussed in your evaluation." I stepped forward, my cane hitting the floor with a crack. "You never evaluated me," I said. "I have never seen you in my life. You signed a paper saying I was demented while I was standing in line at the DMV." Sterling didn't flinch. He just sighed, a condescending sound that made my blood boil. "Paranoia is a common symptom," he said to the receptionist, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He believes he was at the DMV. It is a fabrication, a false memory to cope with his cognitive decline." He turned to me, his eyes cold and dead. "Mr. Robinson, please go home. Your daughter-in-law is very worried about you. If you continue to cause a disturbance, I will have to call security and have you detained under the terms of the guardianship." He was daring me. He was standing there wrapped in the armor of his credentials, knowing that the world would believe a doctor in a white coat over a black man in work boots. He knew the game, and he knew he was winning. I felt the rage rising in my chest, hot and blinding. I wanted to grab him by his starched collar. I wanted to shake the truth out of him. I slammed my hand on the reception desk, making the computer monitor shake. "Show me the video," I shouted. "You have cameras in the exam rooms. Show me the footage of me sitting in your office on October 15th. You can't because it doesn't exist. You are a liar and a thief." "Sir, step back," the receptionist squeaked, pressing a panic button under the desk. 2 uniformed security guards appeared from the hallway. They were big men with bored expressions. They saw an old black man yelling at a white doctor, and they didn't need to ask questions. They just moved in. "Sir, you need to leave," one of them said, reaching for my arm. "Don't touch me," I snarled, pulling away. "I am not crazy. I am the victim of a crime." The guard grabbed my shoulder. His grip was firm. "Sir, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Dr. Sterling says you are a danger to yourself. Do not make us restrain you." I looked at Abernathy. He was standing by the wall holding his folder, his face pale. We were losing. If they took me down now, if they strapped me to a gurney and injected me with a sedative, it was over. Tiffany would win. The bulldozers would win. Bulldozers. I needed a weapon. Not a physical one. A bigger one. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. Saul. Saul Berkowitz was a man I served with in Vietnam. He was a tunnel rat back then, small and mean. Now he was a lawyer who operated out of a strip mall in Decatur. He wasn't fancy, he didn't have billboards, but he was a pit bull. He hated the system as much as I did. The phone rang once, twice. "Yeah." Saul answered, his voice sounding like gravel in a blender. "Saul, it's Zeke. I am at St. Jude's Hospital. They are trying to detain me. They say I have dementia. They say I have a guardian." "Zeke," Saul said, the humor draining from his voice. "Who is the guardian?" "Tiffany," I said. "She forged the papers, Saul. She has a doctor here saying he examined me. Security is on me. Put me on speaker, Zeke, Saul commanded. Put me on damn speaker right now. I held the phone up like a shield. The guard was reaching for my other arm. Stop, I yelled. My lawyer is on the phone. The guard hesitated. Dr. Sterling rolled his eyes. Mr. Robinson, this is a delusion. You don't have a lawyer. I pressed the speaker button. Saul's voice filled the lobby, loud and angry. This is Saul Berkowitz, attorney at law, bar number 45,922. If anyone touches my client, Mr. Ezekiel Robinson, I will file a federal civil rights lawsuit so fast your grandchildren will be paying the legal fees. The guard froze. He looked at Dr. Sterling. Dr. Sterling stiffened. Who is this? I am the man who is going to audit every single file in your office, Dr. Saul growled. Now I want to speak to my client. Zeke, do you have the paperwork? Abernathy stepped forward then. He slid the manila folder onto the desk right in front of the guards. We have it, he said softly. We have the power of attorney document Tiffany filed. Open it, Zeke Saul barked. Look at the signature. I opened the folder. My hands were steady now. I looked at the signature on the bottom line. Ezekiel James Robinson. It was written in blue ink. The letters were looped and elegant. They leaned forward, slanting sharply to the right like wind-blown grass. I looked at it. I had looked at it before, but I hadn't really seen it. I was too angry at the words to look at the ink. Saul. I am looking at it, I said. It says my name. Describe it, Saul said. Does it lean right or left? It leans right, I said. It slants to the right. There was a silence on the phone, a heavy, pregnant silence. Then Saul laughed. A short, sharp bark of a laugh. Zeke, tell these gentlemen which hand you use to hold a hammer. I looked up at Dr. Sterling. I looked at the guards. I held up my left hand. The hand that was missing the tip of the pinky finger from a table saw accident in '82. The hand that was calloused and scarred. I am left-handed, I said. I have been left-handed since the day I was born. My mother tried to tie my hand behind my back to fix it, but it never took. I write with my left hand. And when a left-handed man writes, Saul explained, his voice dripping with triumph, the natural arc of the wrist makes the letters slant to the left or stand up straight. It is biomechanics. It is impossible for a natural left-handed writer to produce a consistent right-slanting script without conscious effort. That signature is a forgery, Zeke, and it is a bad one. The lobby went quiet. The receptionist stopped typing. The guard released his grip on my shoulder and took a step back. Dr. Sterling's face changed. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a pale, sweaty fear. He looked at the document. He looked at my left hand. He knew he had been caught. Officer, I said, my voice calm, now dangerous. This man claims he watched me sign these papers. If he watched me, he would know I am left-handed. He would know that this signature was written by a right-handed person, probably my daughter-in-law. I turned to Sterling. You never saw me. You never evaluated me. And now you are going to explain to the police why you helped steal an old man's life. Sterling started to back away. There must be a mistake, he stammered. I see so many patients. Maybe the file was mixed up. Save it for the medical board, Saul yelled from the phone. Zeke, get out of there. Don't let them keep you. We have what we need. I closed the folder. I picked up my phone. I looked at the security guard. Am I free to go? I asked. The guard looked at Sterling, who was now frantically typing on his phone, probably calling Tiffany. The guard looked back at me. He nodded slowly. Go ahead, sir. Sorry for the trouble. I didn't smile. I didn't say thank you. I just turned and walked out the automatic doors with Abernathy right beside me. We walked out into the sunlight. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like victory. But the war wasn't over. We had proven the signature was fake, but Tiffany still held the keys to my house. She still had the bulldozers coming on Monday. And she still didn't know that I knew. We got in the truck. Abernathy was shaking, trembling from the adrenaline. Did you see his face? Abernathy asked, a small smile playing on his lips. He looked like he swallowed a lemon. I gripped the steering wheel. He is just a pawn, Abernathy. I want the queen. Tiffany thinks she is smart. She thinks she covered her tracks, but she made one mistake. "What is that?" Abernathy asked. "She forgot that her husband, my son, is right-handed," I said. "She probably made him sign it. She made my own son sign the paper to commit me." The realization was a sharp pain in my chest, but I pushed it down. I couldn't afford to be hurt. I needed to be cold. "We have the evidence," Saul, I said into the phone, which was still connected. "What is the next move?" Saul's voice was low. "The courts are closed, Zeke. We can't get a judge to overturn the order until Monday morning, and by then the demolition crew will be at your door. So we are stuck?" I asked. "Not stuck," Saul said. "We just have to get creative. We can't stop them with paper, not until Monday. So you have to stop them with something else. You have to hold the line, Zeke. Can you do that?" I looked at the road stretching out before me. I looked at the city I had built. "I held the line in the jungle in '68, I said. "I held the line when the Union went on strike in '92. "I think I can hold my own front porch for 24 hours, good Saul said, "because things are about to get ugly. I will draft the emergency motion for Monday morning at 8 a.m. But until then, you are on your own. Don't get arrested. And for God's sake, Zeke, don't shoot anyone." I hung up the phone. I looked at Abernathy. "Are you hungry?" I asked. He blinked. "Hungry? Zeke, we just almost got arrested. I know I said starting the engine, but I have a feeling I'm going to need my strength. And I know a diner that serves the best grits in Atlanta." We drove away from the hospital, leaving the stench of bleach behind. I had my name back. I had my mind back. Now I just had to get my house back. I looked at my left hand resting on the gear shift. The hand that had built a life. The hand that had raised a son. It was an old hand, scarred and weathered, but it was not a shaking hand. It was a fist, and it was ready to strike. The phone buzzed against my thigh like an angry hornet. I was steering the truck onto the highway, merging into the Saturday traffic with a recklessness that made Abernathy grip the dashboard handle with both hands. I knew who was calling before I even looked at the screen. It was her. The woman who had signed my name with a right-handed slant. The woman who had declared me incompetent while I was parallel parking my truck at the DMV, Tiffany. I pressed the answer button on the steering wheel. I didn't say hello. I just let the silence hang there heavy and accusatory. "Dad, Dad, are you there?" Her voice was high-pitched, breathless. It was a performance. She sounded like a worried daughter terrified for her wandering father. If I hadn't seen the paperwork in Abernathy's folder, I might have bought it. I might have felt guilty for making her worry. But now all I heard was the hiss of a snake. "I am here, Tiffany," I said, keeping my voice flat. "I am driving." "Driving!" Her voice spiked an octave higher. "Dad, you shouldn't be driving. You know what Dr. Sterling said. Where are you?" "I am at the house and the door is locked. I have been knocking for 10 minutes. We were so worried." She always used that word. As if she and Dante were a united front. As if my son was standing right next to her holding the knife she was twisting in my back. "I went out for breakfast," I lied. "Why are you at my house, Tiffany?" "It is Saturday. You said you were coming Monday." There was a pause, a hesitation. She was recalibrating her lie. "Well, Dante and I had a surprise for you," she said, the syrup returning to her tone. "We know how stressed you were about the leaves, so we decided to just get it done today. We didn't want you worrying all weekend. I brought a few friends over to help clear the yard. We just want to make it nice for you, Dad. Just come home, okay? We have a surprise." A surprise. The last surprise she gave me was a nursing home brochure in my mailbox. "I am 5 minutes away," I said. "Don't touch anything until I get there." I hung up. I pressed my foot down harder on the gas pedal. The old Ford roared in protest, but it surged forward. Abernathy looked at me, his face pale. "Zeke, what did she say?" "She said she brought friends to clean the yard," I said through gritted teeth. "But Tiffany doesn't have friends who do manual labor. She has contractors. She isn't raking leaves, Abernathy. She is clearing the site. But she can't." Abernathy argued, his voice shaking. "The permit said Monday. The demolition permit starts Monday. If she starts today, it is illegal. She doesn't care about legal," I snapped, swerving around a slow-moving minivan. "She has a piece of paper that says she owns me. She thinks if she knocks the house down today, nobody will ask questions on Monday. She is creating a fact on the ground. Once the trees are down and the porch is smashed, there is no going back." I turned off the highway and onto MLK Drive. The familiar streets of my neighborhood flashed by. The barber shop where I got my first haircut. The church where I married Sarah. The corner store where Dante used to buy candy. This was my world, and she was trying to erase it. I turned onto my street. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a painful, rhythmic thud. I prayed I was wrong. I prayed that maybe, just maybe, she had actually hired a landscaping crew. Maybe I was just a paranoid old man. But then I heard it. Before I even saw the house, I heard the sound. It was a deep, guttural roar, the sound of a diesel engine idling under load. It was the sound of torque, the sound of destruction. I knew that sound. I had listened to it for 40 years. That was the sound of a bulldozer. I whipped the truck around the final corner, and there it was, my nightmare in bright yellow and steel. A massive flatbed truck was parked across the bottom of my driveway, blocking the entire street. And sitting on top of it, gleaming in the sun, was a Caterpillar D6 bulldozer. Its steel tracks were caked with mud, but its blade was shiny and clean. But that wasn't the worst part. In the yard, my yardmen were already at work. They weren't raking leaves. They were wielding chainsaws. The buzz of the saws cut through the Saturday morning air like a scream. I slammed on the brakes, screeching to a halt right behind the flatbed. I didn't even turn off the engine. I threw the door open and jumped out, my boots hitting the pavement hard. I saw her. Tiffany was standing near the front porch. She wasn't wearing gardening gloves today. She was wearing a hard hat and holding a clipboard. She was pointing at my fence, the white picket fence I had painted every spring for 30 years. "Tear it down," she was shouting over the noise of the chainsaws. "Get that fence out of the way so we can unload the dozer. I want the perimeter clear in 20 minutes. I watched as a man with a crowbar jammed it into the wood of my fence. With a sickening crunch, he ripped a section of the railing loose. The wood splintered and groaned. It felt like he was ripping a rib out of my chest. "Hey!" I roared. My voice was loud, a command that came from the diaphragm, just like in my foreman days. "Hey!" Tiffany spun around. She saw me. She saw the truck. She saw Abernathy climbing out of the passenger side, looking terrified. For a second, she looked shocked, but then her face hardened. She adjusted her hard hat and walked toward me, not with an apology, but with a stride of authority. "Dad," she yelled, trying to be heard over the machinery. "Go back to the truck. It is not safe here. You are not wearing protective gear." I walked past her, ignoring her outstretched hand. I walked straight to the man with the crowbar. "Put it down," I said. I didn't shout. I said it with the cold, hard certainty of a man who knows how to use a hammer. "Put it down or I will bury it in your skull." The worker, a young guy with tattoos on his neck, looked at me. He looked at the crowbar. He looked at Tiffany. "Keep working," Tiffany shrieked. "He is confused. He has dementia. Do not listen to him. I am the legal guardian." I signed the work order. "Tear down the fence." The worker hesitated. He saw the fire in my eyes. He lowered the crowbar slowly. I turned to face Tiffany. She was standing there in my driveway on my land, holding a clipboard that authorized the destruction of my life. She looked ridiculous in that hard hat, a child playing dress-up in a war zone. "You lied," I said, stepping closer to her. "You said Monday." "Plans changed," she said, her voice losing its fake sweetness. "We got an opening in the schedule. It is better this way, Dad. Just get it over with. Look at this place. It is a dump. We are doing you a favor. We are liquidating a distressed asset so you can afford the care you need." "Care," I spat the word out. "You mean the prison you built for me at Silver Lake?" Her eyes widened slightly. So I had figured it out. "Good. Dad, you are becoming aggressive," she said, stepping back and pulling her phone from her pocket. "This is exactly what Dr. Sterling warned us about. You are having an episode. I am going to call the transport team. They can take you directly to the facility from here. It will be safer for everyone." She was threatening me. Right here in the sunlight with the neighbors watching from their windows. She was going to call a van to haul me away while she fed my house to the machine. I looked at the bulldozer. The driver was in the cab, revving the engine, waiting for the signal to roll off the flatbed. Once that thing hit the dirt, it would be over. A dozer that size could level my house in an hour. I looked at Abernathy. He was standing by my truck, clutching his chest. He couldn't fight this. The worker with the crowbar was gripping his tool again, waiting for Tiffany's command. I was outnumbered. I was outgunned. And legally, I didn't even exist. But I had one advantage. I knew this land. I knew every inch of it. I knew where the soft spots were. I knew where the pipes ran. And I knew where I kept my own tools. "I am not going anywhere, Tiffany," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And neither is that bulldozer. I turned and ran, not toward her, but toward the house. "Dad, stop," she screamed. "Grab him. Don't let him go inside. He might hurt himself." The worker with the crowbar took a step toward me, but I was faster. I didn't go to the front door. I went to the side of the porch where the lattice work was loose. I ripped the panel away, revealing the dark crawl space underneath the house. I didn't need a gun. I didn't need a lawyer. Not right now. I reached into the darkness and pulled out the one thing I had retrieved from the shed the night before. The one thing I had cleaned and oiled while I was pacing the floor. It wasn't a weapon, it was a tool. But in the hands of a desperate man, anything is a weapon. I stood up holding my old double-barrel shotgun. It wasn't loaded. I hadn't bought shells for it in 20 years. But Tiffany didn't know that. The worker with the crowbar didn't know that. I pumped the action. The sound was distinct. Clack, clack. It was a universal language. It meant, "Stop. Get off my land," I yelled, pointing the barrel at the sky. Tiffany screamed and ducked behind the flatbed truck. The worker dropped the crowbar and ran toward the street. The chainsaw stopped buzzing. The only sound left was the idle of the bulldozer and my own heavy breathing. Dad put the gun down. Tiffany shrieked from behind the tire. "You are insane. You are proving my point." "I am not insane," I yelled back. "I am defending my home. Now tell that driver to turn off the engine or I will shoot the hydraulic line and bleed that machine dry right here in the street." It was a bluff. A massive, dangerous bluff. If the police came now, I would be the one in cuffs. I would be the violent, armed madman she claimed I was. But I had bought time. The chainsaws were silent. The fence was still standing. I looked at Abernathy. He was dialing on his phone, calling Saul, calling help. I stood on my porch, the uncharged shotgun heavy in my hands, and I waited. The standoff had begun. The steel of the Remington 870 was cold against my palms, but my blood was boiling hot. I stood on the top step of the porch that I had built with my own hands 30 years ago. I pumped the action. Clack, clack. The sound was sharper than the chainsaw, clearer than the diesel engine. It was the universal sound of a line being drawn in the sand. I knew the gun was empty. I hadn't bought shells for it since the raccoon problem of '99, but the man in the bulldozer cab didn't know that. Tiffany didn't know that. And my son Dante, who was cowering behind the flatbed truck, certainly didn't know that. To them, I was just a crazy old black man with a shotgun and nothing left to lose. And in a way, they were half right. I had nothing left to lose because they had already stolen it all. "Turn it off!" I bellowed, my voice cracking like thunder over the yard. "Kill that engine or I will put a slug right through the radiator block." The driver of the bulldozer didn't need to be told twice. He was a working man, probably earning $20 an hour. He wasn't paid enough to die for a real estate deal. He killed the ignition. The sudden silence that fell over the neighborhood was heavy and suffocating. The birds had stopped singing. The wind seemed to hold its breath. All eyes were on me. And then the screaming started. "He is crazy. Oh my God, he is going to kill us. Call 911, call them now." Tiffany emerged from behind the truck. She wasn't running away. She was advancing toward the street, waving her arms at the neighbors who had gathered on their lawns. She was putting on a show, a masterclass in victimhood. "Look at him," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "My father-in-law has lost his mind. He is having a psychotic break. Please, someone help us. He is armed and dangerous." She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I knew she wasn't calling the police to save me. She was calling them to validate her paperwork. She needed this. She needed a public spectacle of violence to prove that I belonged in a cage. I didn't look at her. She was just noise. Static. I looked past her to the man standing frozen by the mailbox. My son, Dante. He looked small. He was a grown man of 35 wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, but in that moment he looked like a terrified child. He wouldn't look at me. He was staring at the mud on his boots, his shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself disappear. "Dante," I called out. My voice wasn't a shout anymore. It was low and rough, like gravel. "Step out here. Step out where I can see you." He didn't move. "Dante, look at me. Look at the house you were born in. Look at the porch where your mother sat and brushed your hair." Slowly, painfully, he raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked sick. Sick with guilt, maybe, Or maybe just sick with fear that his inheritance was about to be blown away. Why, I asked. Just one word. Why? He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Tiffany, who was still screaming into her phone, giving the operator our address. Then, he looked back at me. We had to pop. He stammered, his voice barely audible across the yard. The debt. The investors. They were going to take everything. I laughed. A dry, bitter sound that scraped my throat. So, you took mine instead. You sold my blood to pay for your wine. Is that it, Dante? He flinched as if I had slapped him. It is not like that, Pop. We are going to take care of you. The facility is nice. It has a garden. A garden. You are tearing down my garden to build condos, and you are promising me a potted plant in a prison. I adjusted my grip on the shotgun. The metal was getting heavy. My arms were tired. My heart was tired. How much, Dante, I asked. How much did you get for my life? Was it enough? Did you get enough to pay off the bookies? Did you get enough to buy Tiffany another BMW? Or did you sell me cheap? He started to cry, silent tears running down his face. I didn't feel pity. I felt a hollow ache where my pride used to be. My son wasn't evil. He was worse. He was weak. He had let a stranger whisper poison in his ear until he believed that betraying his father was an act of mercy. Suddenly, the wail of sirens cut through the air. They were close. Fast. Tiffany had done her job well. Good, I thought. Let them come. 2 police cruisers screeched around the corner, tires smoking. They slammed to a halt, blocking the bulldozer. Doors flew open. 4 officers poured out, guns drawn. They took cover behind their doors, leveling their service weapons at me. Drop the gun. Drop the weapon now. The command was shouted with the authority of the state. I saw the glint of the barrels. I saw the tension in their shoulders. One twitch of my finger, one wrong move, and they would turn me into a headline. I didn't move. I kept the shotgun pointed at the sky. I wasn't going to point it at them. I wasn't suicidal. But I wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. Sir, put the weapon on the ground and step off the porch. Do it now. I stood my ground. This is my property, I yelled back. These people are trespassing. They are destroying my home. I am defending my land. Officer, over here. Tiffany ran toward the police, hands raised, not in surrender, but in appeal. She was digging into her oversized bag, pulling out the folder that Abernathy and I had seen a copy of, the folder that contained the lie. He is sick, she shouted, breathless and frantic. He has advanced dementia. I am his legal guardian. Look, I have the court order right here. He doesn't know what he is doing. Please don't shoot him. Just help us subdue him. She thrust the papers at the lead officer, a tall sergeant with a gray buzz cut. He glanced at the paper, then back at me. His demeanor shifted. He wasn't looking at a homeowner anymore. He was looking at a liability. He was looking at a confused old man who needed to be managed. Sir, the sergeant called out, his voice taking on a calmer, patronizing tone. Sir, is your name Ezekiel? I am Ezekiel Robinson, I said. And that woman is a liar. That paper is a forgery. We can sort all that out, Ezekiel, the sergeant said, holstering his weapon but keeping his hand on the grip. But right now you need to put the gun down. If you don't put it down, we cannot help you. We don't want to hurt you, Ezekiel. Listen to your daughter. Daughter. The word tasted like ash. She is not my daughter, I spat. And she is not my guardian. My lawyer is drafting a motion right now. If you arrest me, you are aiding and abetting a fraud. Tiffany stepped in front of the officer, blocking his view of me. She lowered her voice, but I could still hear her. He is having an episode, officer. He thinks he is fighting a war. He thinks everyone is an enemy. Dr. Sterling warned us this might happen. Please just take him into custody. The transport team is on their way to take him to Silver Lake. We just need him secure. The sergeant nodded. He believed her. Of course he believed her. She was a well-dressed white woman with official documents. I was an angry black man with a gun. The math was simple. Ezekiel. I am giving you one last warning, the sergeant said, stepping out from behind the car door. Put the gun down. Now. Or we will be forced to engage. I looked at Dante. He was watching me, his face a mask of tragedy. He knew the gun wasn't loaded. He knew I wouldn't shoot, but he didn't say a word. He didn't step forward and tell the police that his father was sane. He let the lie stand. That silence broke me more than the sirens. I looked at the house, my sanctuary. I looked at the overturned sign. Oasis condos. If I died here on this porch, nothing would change. Tiffany would cry crocodile tears at my funeral. Dante would inherit the insurance money. The house would be gone by Tuesday. To win a war, you have to survive the battle. I took a deep breath. I let my shoulders slump. I slowly, very slowly bent my knees. I laid the shotgun on the floorboards of the porch. I stood up and raised my hands, empty hands. Step down off the porch, the sergeant commanded. Turn around, hands behind your head. I walked down the steps. Each step felt like a mile. I walked past the rose bushes Sarah had planted. I walked past the spot where the orange stake was buried. As I reached the bottom step, 2 officers rushed forward. They grabbed my arms, not gently. They spun me around and shoved me against the hood of the cruiser. The cold metal pressed against my cheek. "You are making a mistake," I said as the handcuffs clicked tight around my wrists. The sound was final. Absolute. "We are just doing our job, sir," the young officer said, patting me down. I lifted my head and looked at Tiffany. She was hugging Dante. She was crying into his shoulder, but over his shoulder, her eyes met mine. She smiled. A tiny, triumphant smile that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I got you, Dad," she mouthed. "You are safe now." Safe. They shoved me into the back of the patrol car. The cage was cramped and smelled of stale sweat. I watched through the wire mesh as the officers spoke to Tiffany. She was showing them more papers, pointing at the house, taking control. Dante stood apart from them. He was looking at the ground at the spot where I had been standing. He reached down and picked up something. It was an empty shotgun shell casing I had dropped years ago. He rolled it in his fingers. The engine of the bulldozer roared to life again. I closed my eyes. They had taken my gun. They had taken my freedom. They had taken my home. But they had made one mistake. They hadn't taken my fight. They were taking me to Silver Lake. Good. Let them take me. They thought they were sending an old man to die. They didn't realize they were sending a general to recruit an army. I leaned my head back against the seat and waited for the ride to hell to begin. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The door clicked shut with a magnetic hum that sounded like the final breath of a dying man. It was a heavy sound, a sound that said, "You are no longer a person. You are a file number. You are a problem to be managed." I stood in the center of the room and looked around. White walls, white floor. A bed bolted to the ground, a window made of plexiglass that looked out onto a brick wall. This was the 72-hour hold, the psychiatric evaluation unit, or as the nurse with the tired eyes had called it, the quiet room. They had stripped me, not just of my clothes, but of my identity. They took my boots, the Red Wing leather boots that had walked every inch of my property for 10 years. They took my belt, the leather worn smooth where I buckled it. They took my wallet, my keys, and my phone. They even took the wedding ring off my finger, saying it was a safety hazard. I watched them drop it into a plastic bag labeled Patient 409. I was no longer Ezekiel Robinson. I was Patient 409. Diagnosis, acute paranoia and aggression. Legal status, involuntary hold. I sat on the edge of the mattress. It was thin and smelled of industrial disinfectant and old fear. I didn't scream. I didn't pound on the glass. That is what they expected. That is what Tiffany wanted. She wanted me to rage. She wanted me to throw the plastic chair against the wall so the doctors could nod and scribble in their notebooks saying, "Yes, see how violent he is. See how the dementia has turned him into a monster." But I did not rage. I went cold. I went still. I understood the math. I have always been good at math. Tiffany didn't put me here to cure me. She didn't put me here because she was worried about my mental health. She put me here to buy time. 72 hours, 3 days. Today was Saturday. Monday morning was the demolition date. By the time I was released on Tuesday, assuming I could prove I was sane, my house would be gone. It is a military tactic. It is called creating a fait accompli, a done deal. If she bulldozes the house while I am locked up, I can't stop the machine. I can't stand on the porch. I can't call the news. And once the house is a pile of splinters, it doesn't matter if the guardianship was fake. It doesn't matter if the signature was forged. You can't unbreak a house. You can't uncrush a memory. She would say it was a mistake. She would apologize to the court. She might even pay a fine. But the land would be clear. The condos would rise, and I would be an old man with a check for the damages rotting away in a facility. I lay back on the pillow and stared at the ceiling tiles. I counted the holes. 144 holes in one tile. I closed my eyes and I saw my garden. I saw the oak trees. I saw the way the light hit the front porch in the morning, and I saw the bulldozer. I could hear the engine revving. I could hear the wood snapping. Panic started to rise in my chest. A hot, suffocating wave. I was trapped. I was powerless. I was going to lose everything because my son was too weak to say no to his wife. Then I heard her voice. Sarah. My wife Sarah was a small woman, but she had a spine made of iron. She grew up in the Delta where the storms rolled in off the Gulf and flattened towns in an hour. I remembered a night in 1995. Hurricane Opal was tearing through Georgia. The wind was howling like a banshee. Trees were snapping like toothpicks. I was running around the house, taping windows, moving furniture, trying to outrun the wind. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, shelling peas. She looked at me running around like a headless chicken and she said, "Zeke, stop running." I told her we needed to evacuate. I told her the roof might blow off. She put down the bowl of peas. She looked me in the eye and she said, "Zeke, when the storm comes, don't run. If you run, you get lost. If you run, you get blown away. When the storm comes, you root yourself. You hold onto the foundation. You let the wind blow, but you don't move. You become the stone. Root yourself." I opened my eyes. The panic was still there, but it was smaller now. I sat up. I placed my feet flat on the cold linoleum floor. I felt the ground beneath me. It wasn't my ground. It was a hospital floor. But it was solid. "I am the stone," I whispered to the empty room. "I am not crazy. I am not confused. I am Ezekiel Robinson. And I am still in this fight." I began to think. I began to plan. I couldn't stop the bulldozer from here. I couldn't call Saul, but I could prepare for the moment the door opened. Tiffany thought this was the end. She thought she had checkmated me, but she made a mistake. She assumed that by locking me up she was isolating me. She didn't realize that for a man like me, silence isn't a punishment. It is a workshop. I spent the next hour pacing the room. Not pacing like a caged animal, but pacing like a general inspecting the lines. I walked 4 steps turn, 4 steps turn. I tested my hip. It was sore, but it held. I tested my grip, squeezing the stress ball they had left on the table. A nurse came in to check my vitals. She was young with purple braids and a kind face. She expected a fight. She approached me cautiously, holding the blood pressure cuff like it was a grenade. "Mr. Robinson," she said softly. "I need to check your pressure." I held out my arm. "Go ahead, ma'am," I said. She looked surprised. She wrapped the cuff around my bicep. She pumped it up. She watched the gauge. 120/80, she said, blinking. That is very good, especially considering the circumstances. Usually patients in here are hypertensive." I looked at her. "I am a patient, ma'am, but I am not sick." "Do you know why I am here?" She hesitated. "The chart says—" "I know what the chart says," I interrupted gently. "The chart was written by a man I never met. I am here because my daughter-in-law wants to steal my house. She needs me out of the way for 3 days. The nurse looked down. She couldn't say anything. She had a job to do. But I saw a flicker in her eyes. Doubt. "I don't expect you to believe me," I continued. "But I need you to do one thing for me. Just one thing that won't get you in trouble." She looked at the door, then back at me. "What is it?" "I need a calendar," I said. "And a pencil." She bit her lip. "Pencils are considered sharp objects, Mr. Robinson. I can't leave you with a pencil." "Then give me a crayon," I said. "Give me a napkin. I just need to write. I need to keep my mind sharp. If I just sit here staring at the wall, they win." She nodded slowly. She left the room. A minute later, she returned with a small paper cup of water and a folded napkin. Inside the napkin was a dull orange crayon. "Thank you," I said. She locked the door behind her. I sat at the small table and smoothed out the napkin. I picked up the orange crayon. It was ironic. The same color as the survey stakes. The same color as the warning. I began to write. I didn't write a diary. I wrote a list. I wrote down every date I could remember. The date I bought the land. The date I paid off the mortgage. The date Tiffany came into the family. The date Dante asked to borrow money the first time. I wrote down names. Abernathy. Saul. The neighbors who saw the incident. Mrs. Higgins across the street who sits on her porch all day. She would have seen the bulldozer arriving. She would be a witness. I mapped out the timeline of the fraud. I built a case in my head using a napkin and a crayon. Night fell. The lights in the room didn't turn off, they just dimmed to a sickly gray. I didn't sleep. I lay on the bed and listened to the sounds of the ward. Someone was screaming down the hall. A rhythmic, desperate screaming. I felt for them, but I didn't let the sound inside my head. Sunday came, the agonizing crawl of time. Breakfast was oatmeal. Lunch was a sandwich. Dinner was something that looked like meatloaf. I ate every bite. I did push-ups against the wall. 50 in the morning, 50 at night. My muscles burned, but the pain was good. It reminded me I was alive. Dr. Sterling came by on Sunday afternoon. He stood on the other side of the glass. He didn't come in. He just watched me taking notes on his clipboard. He looked smug. He tapped the glass with his pen. "How are we feeling today, Ezekiel?" he called out through the intercom, his voice tinny and distorted. I walked to the glass. I stood toe-to-toe with him, separated by 2 inches of plastic. I didn't yell. I stared right into his pupils. "I am feeling patient, doctor," I said. He frowned. "Are you still confused about where you are? Do you still believe you were at the DMV?" I smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "I don't believe it," I said. "I know it, and I know you know it. Enjoy your weekend, doctor, because when I get out of here, I am going to make you famous." He clicked the intercom off and walked away quickly. He was scared. Good. Sunday night was the hardest. This was the night before the demolition. I knew that right now, under the cover of darkness, the equipment was being positioned. I knew Tiffany was probably popping a bottle of champagne, celebrating her victory. I knew Dante was probably drinking to forget what he had done. I imagined my house. I walked through the rooms in my mind. I touched the walls. I smelled the cedar closet. I said goodbye to the physical structure. But I made a promise to the land. "They can take the wood," I whispered to the darkness. "They can take the brick, but they can't take the truth, and they can't take me." Monday morning arrived. The 72 hours were not up yet, but the legal machinery outside was turning. Saul would be at the courthouse right now, filing the emergency injunction. Abernathy would be mobilizing whatever contacts he had left. I sat on the bed, fully dressed in my hospital scrubs. I had folded my blanket perfectly. I was ready. At 10 a.m., the door buzzed. It wasn't the nurse with the purple braids. It was a man in a suit. He looked tired. He held a briefcase. "Mr. Robinson," he said, "I am Dr. Aris. I am the head of psychiatry here." I stood up. "Good morning, doctor." He looked at me. He looked at the room. He looked at the napkin covered in orange writing on the table. "I have just finished reviewing your file," he said, "and I have just had a very interesting phone call from a lawyer named Saul Berkowitz, and another call from the DMV. I waited. I didn't speak. Dr. Aris sighed. He walked over and unlocked the restraints on the bed even though I wasn't in them. "Mr. Berkowitz faxed over a copy of your driver's license renewal, and the DMV confirmed you were there on October 15th, at the exact time Dr. Sterling claimed you were here in a catatonic state." He turned to me. His face was grim. "There seems to have been a grave error. Dr. Sterling has been suspended pending an investigation." He pulled a plastic bag from his pocket. "My wedding ring. We can't hold you, Mr. Robinson. You are free to go. We are processing your discharge papers now." I took the ring. I slid it onto my finger. It fit perfectly. "Thank you, doctor," I said, "but I need to go now. Right now." "The paperwork takes time," he started to say. "I don't have time," I said, walking to the door. "My house is being demolished." I walked out of the room. I walked barefoot down the hallway to the intake desk. I demanded my boots. I demanded my clothes. When I laced up my boots, I felt the power return to my legs. I stood up. I was no longer patient 409. I was Zeke. I walked out the front doors of the hospital. The sun was blinding. It was Monday. 10:45 a.m. I was free. But as I looked toward the parking lot where I hoped Abernathy was waiting, I heard my phone buzz. They had just given it back to me. I looked at the screen. It was a text from Abernathy. It was just a photo of my house, or what was left of it. The roof was caved in. The front porch was splintered kindling. The chimney had collapsed. And the text underneath read, "They started early." "I am sorry, Zeke." I stared at the phone. My heart stopped. Then it started again, harder, darker. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I remembered Sarah. When the storm comes, don't run. Root yourself. The house was gone, the wood was dead, but the land was still there, and the war had just changed. It wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was a revenge mission. I put the phone in my pocket. I saw Abernathy's car pulling up to the curb. I walked toward it not with the shuffle of a defeated old man, but with the stride of a soldier returning to the front. "Let's go," I said as I got in, where Abernathy asked, his eyes red from crying. "There is nothing left to save Zeke." "Drive," I said, looking straight ahead. "Drive to the ashes. I want them to see me. I want them to see that they knocked down the house, but they missed the man. And the man is coming for them." I walked out of the hospital doors, and the first thing that hit me was the smell of the city. It smelled of exhaust fumes and hot asphalt and rain on the wind. To most people, it is just the smell of Atlanta traffic. To me, it smelled like oxygen. It smelled like a second chance. I stood on the curb, clutching the plastic bag that held my toothbrush and the few personal effects they had allowed me to keep. I felt strange, lighter, but also heavier. My boots were laced tight, but my legs felt a little shaky, not from age, but from the sheer adrenaline dump of being released from a cage I thought would be my coffin. I looked for a taxi or maybe a bus. I didn't have my truck. My truck was probably still parked in front of my house, or maybe Tiffany had towed it. The thought made my jaw clench. Then I heard a sound that sounded like a tractor coughing up a lung. A car pulled up to the curb. It was a 1998 Lincoln Town Car. The paint was peeling off the hood in large flakes that looked like sunburned skin. The bumper was held on with duct tape and hope. The muffler was clearly gone because the idle sounded like a thunderstorm. The passenger window rolled down with a screech of metal on metal, and there was Abernathy. He looked tired. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he had not shaved. The gray stubble on his chin matched the gray of his cardigan, but he was smiling. It was a small, crooked smile that showed a lot of gum and a lot of satisfaction. "Get in, Zeke," he said, before they changed their minds. I opened the heavy door and slid onto the cracked leather seat. The car smelled of old peppermint candy and stale pipe tobacco. It was the best smell in the world. I shut the door, and the silence inside the cabin was sudden and profound. Abernathy didn't drive away immediately. He just looked at me. He reached over and patted my shoulder with a hand that felt like a bundle of dry twigs. "You look like hell, Zeke," he said. "I feel like hell," I replied. "How did you do it, Abernathy? How did you get me out?" The doctor said the hold was mandatory. Tiffany had the papers. Abernathy put the car in gear, and we pulled away from the hospital, merging into the flow of indifferent traffic. "Tiffany has papers," he said, his eyes on the road. "But I have history." He reached into the back seat and pulled out a thermos. He unscrewed the cap and handed it to me. It was black coffee, strong enough to strip paint. "I told you I worked in the court system for 35 years, he continued. "I was a clerk. People think clerks are nobodies. They think we just file papers and fetch coffee. They don't realize that we are the ones who decide which papers get to the top of the stack and which ones fall behind the desk." He took a turn a little too fast, and the old car groaned. "Judge Calloway," he said. "The Honorable Justice Calloway. He is a hard man, a strict man, but he is a man who hates two things. He hates liars, and he hates bullies. Back in '92, when his son got into some trouble, I made sure the paperwork was handled with discretion. He never forgot it." I took a sip of the coffee. The heat spread through my chest. "So, you called in a favor?" I asked. "I called in a debt," Abernathy corrected. "I went to his house this morning, Zeke. On a Sunday. I sat on his front porch until he came out to get his newspaper. I showed him the signature on the guardianship papers. I showed him the DMV photo. I showed him the medical report from a doctor who wasn't even in the state." Abernathy gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Calloway didn't just sign a release order. He signed a subpoena for Dr. Sterling. And he revoked the emergency guardianship effective immediately. He was furious, Zeke. You should have seen him. He said using the mental health statutes to steal property is the lowest form of corruption." I looked at this old man driving a car that should have been in a junkyard 10 years ago. He was invisible to the world. A relic. But he wielded power like a scalpel. "Thank you," I said. It was not enough, but it was all I had. "Don't thank me yet," Abernathy said, his face grim. "Getting you out is just the first step. We have a bigger problem." I know, I said, looking out the window. My house. They destroyed it. Abernathy shook his head. Not exactly. That text I sent you. It was true, but not the whole truth. They started the demolition. They knocked down the porch. They tore off the roof of the garage. They ripped up the garden. The house is a shell, Zeke. It is uninhabitable. He paused, waiting for me to react. I didn't. I just stared at the passing buildings. But he continued. The main event is tomorrow. Tomorrow, I asked. Tuesday morning, Abernathy said. 8 a.m. Tiffany has organized a groundbreaking ceremony. She has invited the press. She has invited the investors. She wants a photo op. She wants to be seen standing in front of the wreckage of your home holding a golden shovel, announcing the future of the Oasis condos. He glanced at me. She thinks you are still in the hospital. She thinks you are sedated and locked away for another 24 hours. She thinks the house is empty and the war is over. She is expecting a celebration, Zeke. I felt a cold smile spreading across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a wolf that has just found the scent of blood. So she doesn't know I am free, I said. No, Abernathy confirmed. The hospital hasn't notified her yet. The release order was processed by the judge directly. By the time the paperwork trickles down to her notification system, it will be too late. We drove in silence for a few minutes. The city of Atlanta rolled by outside. My city. The city I helped build. And now, the city that was trying to bury me. We are two old men, Abernathy said softly. You are a retired foreman. I am a retired clerk. We have no money. We have no influence. We drive cars that are falling apart, and we take pills to keep our hearts beating. He looked at me, his eyes twinkling with a mischievous, dangerous light. To them, we are obsolete. We are just obstacles. Debris to be cleared away. He pulled the car over to the side of the road. We were on a hill overlooking the downtown skyline. The sun was setting, turning the glass skyscrapers into pillars of fire. But they forgot one thing, Abernathy said. What is that, I asked. They forgot that debris can be dangerous, he said. They forgot that if you ignore the foundation, the whole house comes down. He turned off the engine. He turned. They think you are in a cage. They think they are going to have a party on your grave tomorrow morning. Do you want to go home and cry over the ruins, Zeke? Or do you want to play a big game? I looked at him. A big game. What do you have in mind, I asked. Abernathy reached into the glove compartment. He pulled out a folded set of blueprints. They were old, blue and white. The edges were yellowed. These are the original city survey maps from 1970, he said. Back when they laid the main sewer lines for this district, back when your father bought that land. He unfolded the map on the dashboard. He traced a thick red line that ran directly under my property. See this, he said, pointing to the line. This is the main arterial water main for the entire west side. It is a 36-inch pipe. High pressure. It runs right through your backyard. Right where Tiffany plans to dig the foundation for her parking garage. I leaned in closer. I knew about the pipe. My father had told me about it. He told me never to dig deep in the south corner. Tiffany's survey didn't show this, I said. Her map showed clear dirt. Because she used a cheap surveyor, Abernathy said. Or maybe she bribed him to ignore it. It doesn't matter. The point is she doesn't know it is there. And she has a heavy excavator scheduled to start digging tomorrow morning at 8:15 a.m., right after her speech. He looked at me. If that excavator hits that pipe, it won't just make a splash. It will flood the entire neighborhood. It will cost the city millions, and it will result in an immediate federal investigation into the permitting process. It will stop the project not for a week, but for years. I looked at the map. I looked at the red line. It was a kill switch, buried under my own grass. But we can't let them hit it, I said. That would destroy the neighbors' homes too. It would be a disaster. Abernathy smiled. Exactly. We don't let them hit it. We let them get close. We let them set up the stage. We let them invite the cameras. We let Tiffany stand there in her white dress holding her golden shovel. And then we show up. I finished the thought. We show up, Abernathy agreed. And we don't just bring a lawsuit. We bring the truth. We bring the map. And we do it live. I sat back in the seat. The plan was crazy. It was risky. It required perfect timing. If we were late, the pipe would burst. If we were too early, she might find a way to spin it. But it was perfect. It wasn't just about saving the land. It was about exposing the lie. It was about showing the world that Tiffany didn't care about the community. She just cared about the profit. I looked at my hands. The hospital bracelet was still on my wrist. I ripped it off. The plastic snapped with a sharp sound. "I am in," I said. Abernathy nodded. He started the car. The engine roared back to life. "Good," he said, "because I made a few other calls. We have work to do tonight. We need to get into your house. Or what is left of it. We need to retrieve something. What I asked." "Your dignity," Abernathy said, "and maybe a few other surprises I buried in the paperwork." He put the car in drive. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To the hardware store," Abernathy said. "If we are going to crash a party, we should bring a gift." We drove down the hill into the gathering darkness. The city lights were coming on one by one. Somewhere in a luxury condo, Tiffany was probably picking out her outfit for tomorrow. She was probably rehearsing her speech about community and progress. She had no idea that two old men in a rusted Lincoln were coming to rewrite her ending. I felt a fire in my belly that I hadn't felt since I was 20 years old. It was the fire of righteous indignation. "Let's go," I said, and as we drove, I made a silent promise to Sarah. "I am rooting myself, Sarah, and tomorrow the wind is going to blow." The alliance of the obsolete was on the move, and we were bringing the storm with us. The moon was a sliver of bone in the sky when we pulled up 2 blocks away from my house. We parked under the canopy of an old magnolia tree, its leaves thick enough to hide Abernathy's beat-up Lincoln. I turned off the engine, and for a moment we just sat there listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The street was quiet. Too quiet. It was the silence of a neighborhood holding its breath before a funeral. "Are you ready?" Zeke Abernathy whispered. He was clutching a flashlight in one hand and a heavy wrench in the other. He looked like a librarian trying to be a cat burglar, but his hands weren't shaking anymore. "I am ready," I said. I opened the door and stepped out into the night air. It was cool and damp, smelling of wet earth and pine needles. I knew this air. I had breathed it for 40 years. But tonight it tasted different. It tasted like gunpowder. We walked through the shadows, sticking to the tree line. I moved with a stealth I hadn't used since I was a recon scout in the jungle. My hip ached with every step, but I pushed the pain down into my boots. Pain is just information. And right now, the only information that mattered was that my enemy was sleeping soundly while I was creeping through my own backyard. We reached the perimeter of the property. The yellow caution tape was strung up between the trees, flapping lazily in the breeze. Caution demolition zone. I ducked under it. I didn't feel like a trespasser. You can't trespass on your own soul. The house loomed in front of us. It looked wounded. The front porch was gone, ripped away, leaving jagged raw wood exposed like broken teeth. The windows were dark. I walked to the back door, the one I had used 1,000 times to carry in groceries or let the dog out. I reached for the handle. Locked. But it wasn't my lock. The heavy brass deadbolt I had installed in 1982 was gone. In its place was a shiny, cheap electronic keypad. A smart lock. Tiffany. She didn't just steal the house, she sealed it. She wanted to make sure I couldn't get back in to retrieve my memories. She changed the locks. Abernathy hissed, shining his light on the keypad. "How do we get in?" I smiled, a grim, humorless smile. "She changed the locks, Abernathy, but she didn't change the house. She doesn't know this house. I built the addition in '95. I know where the weak spots are." I led him around the side to the crawl space entrance. The lattice work was loose, just like I knew it would be. I pulled it aside, revealing the small wooden door that led to the basement. It was secured with a simple hook and eye latch. I reached in and flicked it open. We crawled into the damp darkness of the basement. It smelled of earth and old insulation. We climbed the wooden stairs that groaned under my weight. I pushed open the door at the top and we stepped into the kitchen. Abernathy clicked on his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. My breath hitched in my throat. I reached out and steadied myself against the counter. It wasn't just that the house was dark, it was empty. Completely empty. My kitchen table, the oak one where I taught Dante to do math, was gone. The chairs were gone. The pictures on the walls were gone, leaving clean square patches on the faded wallpaper. We walked into the living room. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor. It was a hollow, lonely sound. Sarah's china cabinet, the one she polished every Sunday, gone. The grandfather clock that had chimed every hour for 30 years, gone. The armchair where I sat and watched the news, gone. Tiffany hadn't just secured the property. She had liquidated it. In the 3 days I was locked in the hospital, she had brought in a crew and stripped the house to the studs. She had sold my life. She had sold my memories to the highest bidder, probably at some estate sale, for pennies on the dollar. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It was hot and angry. She didn't even pack them in boxes for me. She just sold them. Like they were trash. Like I was already dead. Zeke Abernathy whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I am so sorry. I wiped the tear away. Don't be sorry, I said, my voice sounding strange in the empty room. Be angry. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard. The moonlight illuminated the churned-up earth where the garden used to be. The orange stakes were still there, marking the foundation for the parking garage. She took the furniture, I said, gripping the windowsill until my knuckles turned white. She took the things she could sell, but she left the one thing she couldn't see. I turned to Abernathy. Give me the map. He handed me the folded blue paper. I spread it out on the floor, shining the flashlight on it. Show me again, I said. Again. Abernathy traced the red line. The 36-inch arterial sewer main. It ran diagonally across the backyard, entering from the east corner and running deep under the soil right through the center of what Tiffany called Lot B. According to her survey, this is clear dirt, Abernathy said. She thinks she can dig down 20 feet for the underground parking. But the pipe is only 6 feet down. And the safety valve, I asked. Right here, Abernathy pointed to a spot near the old pecan tree. It is an inspection port, a vertical pipe that comes up to just below the surface. It has a magnetic tracer wire attached to it so the utility scanners can find it. I nodded. I knew how construction worked. Before any excavator digs, the foreman walks the site with a magnetic scanner. If there is a pipe, the scanner screams. If the scanner stays silent, they dig. Tiffany's map says there is no pipe, but the scanner would prove her wrong. The scanner would save her. It would beep, and the foreman would stop and say, "Hey, there is something down here. We can't let the scanner save her." I stood up. "Let's go outside," I said. "Bring the wrench, and bring the shovel." We went out the back door. The night air felt colder now. We walked to the spot near the pecan tree. The ground was soft, churned up by the tracks of the machinery from Saturday. I measured the distance from the fence, just like I did when I was a foreman. 12 feet out, 4 feet over. "Dig here," I said. We took turns. The shovel sliced into the wet clay. It was heavy work. My back screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. We dug in silence, terrified that a neighbor might see the flashlight beam, but no one looked. To the world, we were just shadows. 2 feet down, the shovel hit metal with a dull clang. I dropped to my knees. I used my hands to clear away the dirt. There it was. An old iron cap, rusted and pitted. And wrapped around it was a thin green wire. The tracer wire. This wire, I whispered, touching it gently, is the only thing standing between Tiffany and disaster. As long as this wire is connected, the scanner will find the pipe. The scanner will tell them to stop. Abernathy looked at me. His face was pale in the moonlight. "Zeke, if you cut that wire..." He trailed off. "If I cut this wire," I said, "the scanner will see nothing but dirt. The map says clear. The scanner says clear. The operator will drop that bucket and drive it with 5 tons of hydraulic force straight into the earth, and he will hit the main," Abernathy said. I looked at the rusted iron. It looked like the trigger of a bomb. If they had done a proper survey, I said, if they had followed the law, they would know this is here. But they didn't. They lied. They forged documents. They erased me. I took the wire cutters from my pocket. I am not destroying the pipe, Abernathy. I am not a vandal. I am just removing the safety net that they didn't earn. I am letting their own negligence be their executioner. I placed the jaws of the cutter around the green wire. "For the house," I whispered. "For the china cabinet. For Sarah." Snip. The sound was tiny, insignificant. But in the silence of the night, it sounded like the firing of a starting gun. I pulled the wire away, burying the ends deep in the mud so they couldn't be seen. Then I took the wrench. I loosened the iron cap just a quarter turn, not enough to leak, just enough to weaken the seal, just enough so that when the bucket hit, it wouldn't glance off. It would catch. We filled the hole back up. We packed the dirt down. We scattered leaves over the fresh earth, making it look undisturbed. We stood up, breathing hard. My hands were covered in mud, the same mud that Tiffany wanted to sell. "It is done," Abernathy said. "No," I said, looking at the spot. "It is just set. The payoff happens tomorrow." We walked back to the house. I took one last look at the empty living room. I imagined Tiffany standing here tomorrow morning in her expensive heels, telling the cameras how she was revitalizing the neighborhood. She had no idea that beneath her feet a monster was waiting to wake up. We crawled back out through the basement. We secured the lattice. We walked back to the car under the cover of the trees. As we drove away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what was coming. Tomorrow morning the sun would rise, the cameras would roll, the golden shovel would hit the dirt, and then the earth would speak. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. I felt a strange sense of peace, the kind of peace you feel when the trap is set and all you have to do is wait for the prey to walk in. "Get some sleep, Abernathy," I said softly. "We have a front row seat to the end of the world tomorrow." And for the first time in 3 days I slept. I slept the dreamless sleep of the righteous man who has finally stopped running and started digging. Tuesday morning dawned with a sky the color of a fresh bruise. It was a fitting backdrop for the funeral of my home. Abernathy and I sat in his Lincoln, parked just around the corner, watching the circus assemble. And it was a circus. Tiffany had spared no expense in turning the wreckage of my life into a photo opportunity. Through the windshield, I watched the transformation. A white tent had been erected right over the spot where my front porch used to be. A red carpet was rolled out over the mud and the crushed remains of Sarah's rose bushes. There were balloons. Gold and silver balloons bobbing in the wind tied to the very survey stakes that marked the death of my property rights. Men in expensive suits arrived in black SUVs. These were the investors, the vultures. They walked with that confident stride of men who have never had to build anything with their own hands, only buy what others have built. They laughed and shook hands, checking their watches, eager to see the ground broken so the money could start flowing. And then there was Tiffany. She stepped out of her white BMW looking like she was attending a gala. She wore a white dress and high heels that sank slightly into the soft earth. She held a clipboard in one hand and a gold-plated shovel in the other. It was a prop, a shiny, useless tool for a woman who wouldn't know which end of a real shovel to hold. Dante stood beside her. My son. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. He wore a dark suit, but his tie was crooked. He wasn't smiling. He kept rubbing his face, looking around nervously, as if he expected ghosts to rise from the rubble. In a way, he was right. A ghost was coming. Abernathy looked at his watch. "It is 8:05, Zeke. The press van just pulled up. I saw the local news crew setting up their cameras. A young reporter was checking her makeup in a compact mirror, preparing to tell the heartwarming story of urban renewal. "It is time," I said. I opened the car door. I wasn't wearing hospital scrubs anymore. I was wearing my Sunday best. My dark navy suit pressed and clean, my white shirt starched, my shoes polished to a mirror shine. I put on my fedora, adjusting the brim just so. Abernathy reached into the back seat and handed me 2 things: my folding chair, the old canvas one I used for fishing, and a thermos of hot tea. "Ready for the performance?" Abernathy asked, his eyes gleaming. I took the chair. "I am not performing, Abernathy. I am occupying." We walked down the street. We didn't run. We didn't shout. We walked with the slow, deliberate rhythm of men who own the ground beneath their feet. As we approached the property line, the sound of the crowd reached us. Chatter, laughter, the clink of champagne glasses. They were toasting the destruction of a man's legacy. A security guard, a burly man in a yellow vest, stepped forward to block our path. "Sir, this is a private event," he started to say. I didn't stop. I just looked him in the eye. "I am Ezekiel Robinson," I said, my voice low and hard. "This is my address on my driver's license, and unless you have a warrant for my arrest, get out of my way." He hesitated. He saw the suit. He saw the look in my eyes. He stepped aside. We walked past the red carpet. We walked past the table laden with pastries and coffee. We walked straight into the center of the yard, right into the middle of the group of investors. The chatter died instantly. It was as if someone had cut the power to a speaker. Heads turned, smiles vanished. Tiffany dropped her clipboard. It hit the mud with a wet slap. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like she was seeing a dead man walking. Dante made a sound, a choked sob. He took a step back, bumping into a waiter and nearly knocking over a tray of drinks. I didn't look at them. Not yet. I walked to the exact center of Lot B, the spot directly above the weakened pipe. The spot where the excavator was parked, its massive bucket hovering like a guillotine. I unfolded my chair. It creaked loudly in the silence. I placed it firmly in the mud. I sat down. I crossed my legs. I unscrewed the cap of my thermos and poured a cup of steaming tea. Only then did I look up. "Good morning," I said. My voice was calm, conversational. "I hope I'm not late for the party." Tiffany recovered first. Her shock turned to panic and then to a sharp, brittle anger. She marched over to me, her heels squelching in the dirt. "Dad," she hissed, trying to keep her voice down so the investors wouldn't hear. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be at the hospital. You are sick. You are having an episode." I took a sip of tea. Earl Grey. It was hot and bitter. "I checked out Tiffany," I said. "It turns out I am not crazy, and it turns out you are not my guardian. Judge Calloway sends his regards, by the way." Her face went pale beneath her makeup. She looked around frantically. The investors were watching. The camera crew was filming. She couldn't have me dragged away screaming. Not now. It would ruin the image. "Dad, please," she whispered, a desperate smile plastered on her face for the audience. "Let's go sit in the car. We can talk about this. You are confusing everyone." "I am not confused," I said loud enough for the man in the closest suit to hear. "I am sitting in my backyard, or what is left of it." I swept my hand toward the ruined house. "You did a thorough job, Tiffany. You stripped it clean, sold the furniture, ripped off the roof. You were very efficient." I turned to the investors. "Gentlemen, my name is Ezekiel Robinson. I built this house in 1972. I raised my son here. And 3 days ago, this woman had me committed to a psych ward with forged documents so she could sell this land to you without my consent." A murmur went through the crowd. The investors looked at each other. One of them, a tall man with silver hair, stepped forward. "Mrs. Robinson," he said, looking at Tiffany, "what is he talking about? You said the title was clear. You said the owner was in long-term care." "He is sick!" Tiffany shrieked, her voice cracking. "Don't listen to him. He has dementia. He is paranoid. He thinks the government is after him. We have the court orders." She turned to the foreman of the construction crew who was standing by the excavator. "Start the machine," she commanded. "Start the demolition. We are behind schedule." The foreman looked at me, sitting in my chair directly in the path of the machine. "Lady, I can't dig with a civilian in the hole," he said. "Move him!" Tiffany screamed. She was losing control. The mask was slipping. "Security! Remove this man. He is trespassing on construction site." The security guards looked at each other. They looked at the cameras, which were now zoomed in on my face. They didn't move. They knew that dragging an old man in a suit through the mud on live television was a bad career move. Dante finally spoke. He walked over to me. He looked broken. "Pop, please," he said, his voice trembling. "Just get up. It is over. The house is gone. There is nothing left to save. Why are you doing this?" I looked at my son. I saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of his wife, the fear of his debts. "I am doing this for you, Dante," I said softly, "because someday you will need to know what it looks like to stand your ground." I turned back to Tiffany. "You want to dig?" I asked. "You want to break ground?" I pointed at the earth beneath my chair. "Go ahead. Bring the machine over. Bury me. It wouldn't be the first time you tried." Tiffany turned to the operator of the excavator. She was shaking with rage. "I am paying you to dig," she yelled. "Dig around him. Dig Lot B. Just get started. If you don't break ground in 5 minutes, I will sue your company for breach of contract." The operator looked at his foreman. The foreman shrugged. "Careful around the old guy," the foreman muttered. The massive diesel engine of the excavator roared to life. Smoke belched from the stack. The ground beneath me vibrated. The crowd gasped and stepped back. The machine lurched forward, its tracks clanking and chewing up the soil. The arm lifted the bucket, swinging high into the air. It cast a shadow over me. I didn't flinch. I brought the cup of tea to my lips. My hand was steady. Abernathy was standing by the red carpet, holding his briefcase tight. He nodded to me. The excavator rotated away from me, targeting the patch of ground just 10 feet to my right. The exact spot where we had loosened the cap. The exact spot where the sensor should have been screaming. But the sensor was silent. We had cut the wire. The operator positioned the bucket. He revved the engine. He was preparing to drive the teeth into the earth. I stood up then. I didn't shout. I simply projected my voice. "Wait." The operator paused, his hand hovering over the lever. I looked at the investors. I looked at the reporter. I looked at Tiffany. "You can dig," I said. "You can bulldoze. You can tear it all down. But I am giving you a warning, the only warning you are going to get." I pointed at the ground where the bucket was aimed. "There is something buried down there. Something your survey didn't find. Something your wife didn't tell you about Dante." Tiffany laughed a high manic sound. "Oh God, here we go. What is it, Dad? Pirate treasure, Confederate gold. Ignore him. He is hallucinating. It is worth more than gold," I said, my eyes locking with hers. "And it is worth more than the lives of everyone standing on this red carpet." I took a step forward. "You think this is just dirt," I said. "You think this is just a blank slate for your luxury condos. But the earth remembers Tiffany. The earth holds grudges." I looked at the silver-haired investor. "Sir, if I were you, I would step back. Because when she breaks that seal, she isn't just opening a construction site, she is opening the gates of hell." Tiffany grabbed the foreman's arm. "Dig!" she screamed. "Dig now!" The foreman signaled the operator. The operator pushed the lever forward. The hydraulic arm descended. The steel teeth of the bucket bit into the soft clay. I sat back down in my chair. I took a sip of tea. I watched as the bucket curled, pulling up a massive scoop of earth. And then I waited for the explosion. The diesel engine of the excavator screamed as the operator pushed the throttle forward. The sound was a mechanical roar that drowned out the birds, the wind, and the nervous chatter of the investors. I sat in my canvas fishing chair holding my cup of tea, and I watched the hydraulic arm descend like the hand of a vengeful god. Tiffany was smiling. It was a tight, manic smile, the kind that shows too many teeth. She was gripping her clipboard so hard her knuckles were white. She thought she had won. She thought that once that bucket hit the dirt, once the ground was broken, there was no turning back. She was right, but not in the way she imagined. The steel teeth of the bucket bit into the red Georgia clay. The ground shuddered beneath my feet. I felt the vibration travel up through the legs of my chair. It was the familiar feeling of a job site, the feeling of progress. But this wasn't progress. This was a crime scene in the making. The operator was aggressive. He was annoyed by the delay, annoyed by the old man in the suit, and annoyed by Tiffany's screaming. He wanted to get this over with. He didn't feather the controls. He drove the bucket down hard, aiming for a deep bite to impress the foreman. Because we had cut the tracer wire the night before, his cabin monitor was silent. No beeps, no red flashing lights warning of a utility line. To him and his sensors, the ground was just dumb, inert dirt. He pulled the stick back, curling the bucket to scoop up the earth. And then it happened. There was a sound that I will never forget. It wasn't the sound of digging, it was a crunch. A sickening metallic shriek of steel tearing through iron. It sounded like the earth itself had broken a bone. The operator froze. He knew that sound. Every heavy equipment operator knows that sound. It is the sound of a career-ending mistake. But it was too late. For a split second there was silence, a vacuum where the noise used to be. The investors leaned forward, confused. Tiffany took a step closer, shielding her eyes from the sun. Then the ground exploded. It didn't start with a trickle. It started with a boom that shook the fillings in my teeth. The 36-inch arterial water main, pressurized to 150 pounds per square inch, had been ruptured. The force of the water was like a bomb. A geyser of brown, muddy water shot 40 feet into the air. It was a column of liquid fury. It hit the underside of the excavator arm with such force that the 20-ton machine rocked back on its tracks. "Oh my God," someone screamed. The water hung in the air for a heartbeat, a brown curtain against the blue sky, and then it came down. It came down on the red carpet. It came down on the pastry table. It came down on the investors in their $3,000 suits. And it came down on Tiffany. She stood there frozen as a wall of mud and water slammed into her, knocking her flat on her back. Her white dress, the symbol of her purity and success, turned instant brown. Her clipboard went flying. Her golden shovel was washed away in the torrent. I didn't move. I was sitting in the sweet spot. I had calculated the angle. The water was shooting up and out away from me toward the area where Tiffany had set up her stage. I felt a mist on my face, cool and refreshing, but the deluge missed me by inches. The yard instantly turned into a swamp. The hole where the bucket had dug was widening rapidly as the water eroded the soil. A sinkhole was forming, swallowing the fence and threatening the red carpet. "Shut it off," the foreman screamed, running toward the machine, waving his arms. "Shut it down." But you can't shut off a main break with a key. That water was coming from the city reservoir miles away. It would run until the utility authority could shut the valves at the street level, and that would take hours. The investors were scrambling, slipping in the mud, running for their SUVs. Their dignity was gone, washed away along with their profit margins. They weren't looking at the real estate anymore. They were looking at a disaster area. Tiffany struggled to her feet. She looked like a creature from the lagoon. Her hair was plastered to her skull. Mascara ran down her face in black streaks. She was spitting mud. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You did this! You sabotaged it!" I took a sip of my tea. It was still warm. "I warned you, Tiffany," I said, my voice calm amidst the chaos. "I told you the earth holds grudges." Sirens cut through the sound of the rushing water. But these weren't the wailing sirens of the local police cruisers. These were deeper, more authoritative. "Whoop, whoop!" Tiffany's eyes lit up with a mix of panic and vindication. "The police," she shouted. "Officer, arrest him! Arrest him right now! He destroyed city property!" She scrambled toward the driveway, waving her arms frantically at the approaching vehicles. "Help!" she screamed. "My father-in-law is a terrorist. He blew up the pipe." But as the vehicles came into view, her screaming died in her throat. They weren't police cars. The first vehicle was a black SUV with government plates. The second was a heavy-duty truck with the logo of the Atlanta Department of Watershed Management. And the third was a white sedan with the seal of the Environmental Protection Agency. Doors flew open. Men and women in windbreakers stepped out. They didn't look like they were here to arrest an old man in a chair. They looked like they were here to shut down a crime syndicate. A tall woman in a navy blue jacket with EPA stenciled on the back marched up the driveway. She ignored Tiffany, who was trying to grab her arm. She walked straight to the edge of the sinkhole. She looked at the geyser of water. She looked at the excavator. She looked at the oil slick that was beginning to form on the surface of the mud. "Who is the site supervisor?" she barked. The foreman raised his hand slowly, looking like a kid caught with a cookie. "That would be me, ma'am. Shut that machine down. Contain the oil leak. And get your crew off this site immediately. This is now a federal environmental hazard zone." She turned to Tiffany. "Are you the permit holder?" she asked. Tiffany wiped mud from her eyes, trying to regain some shred of authority. "Yes, I am. I am Tiffany Robinson. I am the legal guardian of the owner. And this man," she pointed at me, "caused this. He tampered with the site." The EPA agent looked at me, sitting calmly in my chair. Then she looked back at Tiffany. "Ma'am, we received a whistleblower report at 7:00 a.m. this morning regarding an illegal excavation on a Class A utility easement. The report stated that the survey maps submitted for this permit were fraudulent and that a high-pressure main was at risk." She pulled a tablet from her bag and tapped the screen. "We checked our records. The survey you submitted shows this lot is clear, but the city master plan shows a 36-inch main. You were digging without a valid utility locate ticket. That is a federal offense." Tiffany gaped. But I have the papers." The surveyor signed off. "Then your surveyor is going to jail too," the agent said coldly. "Do you have any idea how much this is going to cost? You are looking at $50,000 a minute in water loss alone, plus the environmental cleanup fines, plus the infrastructure repair." The agent stepped closer to Tiffany, her boots splashing in the mud. "And since you signed the permit application as the legal guardian, all liability falls on you, Mrs. Robinson, not the owner, you." Tiffany's knees gave out. She sank back down into the mud. She looked at Dante, who was standing by the car untouched by the water but drowning in shame. "Dante, do something," she whimpered. Dante looked at her. He looked at the investors driving away. He looked at me. He didn't move. I stood up then. I folded my chair. I picked up my thermos. I walked carefully around the edge of the expanding sinkhole, making sure my polished shoes stayed clean. I walked up to the EPA agent. "Good morning, ma'am," I said, tipping my hat. "Mr. Robinson, I presume," she said, her face softening slightly. "Yes, ma'am. I am the one who called you. I see that. You were right about the pipe. I was a foreman for 40 years, I said. I know what lies beneath the surface." She nodded. "You might want to step back, sir. The ground is unstable." I looked at Tiffany, who was sitting in the muck, weeping not for the damage she caused, but for the money she had lost. "I am fine here," I said. "I just have one question." "Go ahead," the agent said. "Does a legal guardianship cover felony negligence and environmental destruction?" The agent smirked. "No, sir. Criminal liability is personal. If she authorized this dig knowing the risks, she is on her own." I turned to Tiffany. "Did you hear that, Tiffany?" I asked softly. You are on your own." She looked up at me, hatred burning in her eyes. "You planned this. You let me dig. You knew it was there. I didn't make you dig, Tiffany. I warned you. I sat right there and told you it was worth more than gold. But you were so greedy you wouldn't listen. You thought I was just a senile old man." I leaned in closer so only she could hear. "You forgot the first rule of construction. Before you break ground, you better know what you are standing on. You were standing on a lie, and now you are drowning in it." Another car pulled up. This one was a police cruiser. But it wasn't for me. 2 officers stepped out. They walked over to the EPA agent. She pointed at Tiffany. "Mrs. Robinson," the officer said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "We have a warrant for your arrest regarding the fraudulent submission of city documents and endangerment of public infrastructure. Please stand up," Tiffany screamed. It was a raw, primal sound. "No, no, I am the victim here. He is the crazy one." "Dante, tell them." Dante turned his back. He walked over to the white BMW, opened the door, and sat in the driver's seat. He closed the door, shutting out her voice. I watched as they pulled Tiffany out of the mud. Her white dress was ruined. Her heels were gone, lost in the sludge. They cuffed her hands behind her back. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel happy. I felt a deep, heavy satisfaction, the kind you feel when you finally pull a rotting stump out of the ground. As they led her away, she looked back at me one last time. "I will get the house," she screamed. "I still have the deed. I will sell the land to pay the fines. You will still lose, old man." I shook my head. "You don't have the deed, Tiffany. You have a pile of mud and a lawsuit. No one buys land that is under federal investigation. This property is frozen. And so are your assets." I put my hat back on. I turned to Abernathy, who was standing by the road grinning like a Cheshire cat. "Ready to go?" I asked. "Where to?" Abernathy asked. "To get some lunch," I said. "Digging is hungry work." We walked away, leaving the chaos behind us. The water was still spraying into the air, cleaning the slate, washing away the lies. My house was gone, yes, but the land was still mine. And for the first time in a long time, the air tasted clean. The sound of steel ratcheting against bone is a sound you never forget. Click, click, click. 3 clicks to end a reign of terror. 3 clicks to turn a high society realtor into a felon. I watched the officer tighten the cuffs on Tiffany's wrists. She was struggling, twisting her body like a trapped eel, but the mud made her slippery and weak. Her white dress, once the banner of her arrogance, was now a heavy brown shroud clinging to her legs. She wasn't screaming about the land anymore. She wasn't screaming about the money. She realized that the ship was sinking, and like every rat in history, she was looking for something to climb on to stay dry. "It wasn't me," she shrieked, spitting mud at the officer's chest. "I was coerced. I was forced to do it. It was my husband. It was Dante." The yard went deadly silent. Even the investors who were busy calling their lawyers paused to watch the spectacle. A wife turning on her husband before the back door of the squad car was even open. Tiffany whipped her head around, her eyes wild and searching until they landed on Dante. He was standing by the white BMW, the car bought with stolen deposits, his hand resting on the door handle as if he could just open it and drive away from reality. "Tell them, Dante," she screamed, her voice shredding in the raw air. "Tell them you made me do it. Tell them you needed the money for your gambling debts. Tell them you threatened to leave me if I didn't get the deed signed. It was a lie, a desperate, clawing lie. I knew my son. He didn't have the backbone to threaten anyone. He was a follower, a shadow. But seeing his wife, his goddess, the woman he had worshipped for 5 years, try to feed him to the wolves broke something inside him." Dante stared at her. His mouth hung open. He looked like a man who had just been stabbed by his own shadow. "Tiffany," he whispered. "How can you—" "You are pathetic," Tiffany yelled as the officer shoved her toward the car. "You are a weak, useless man, Dante. I did everything for you. I built this life for us. And you just stood there and watched it burn. You coward, you are just like your father." The officer pushed her head down to clear the door frame. She fought him, kicking her legs, leaving muddy streaks on the clean white paint of the cruiser. "I want a deal," she screamed as the door slammed shut. "I have information. I can give you names. I want a lawyer." Then silence. The heavy, muffled silence of a sealed car. Through the glass I could see her mouth still moving, still screaming, but the sound was gone. She was just a silent movie now. A tragedy in a glass box. The investors shook their heads and walked away disgusted. They didn't look at Dante. To them, he was invisible. He was just the husband of the fraudster. Collateral damage. The police cars began to roll away, their lights flashing red and blue against the gray sky. The EPA agent finished writing her citation, stuck it to the gatepost, and drove off. And then there were two, me standing on the edge of the sinkhole in my suit and hat, and Dante standing in the mud by the empty driveway. He looked at the departing police car. He looked at the ruined yard. And then slowly, painfully, he turned to look at me. He looked 50 years old in that moment. The expensive suit hung on him like a costume. His face was gray. His eyes were hollowed out by a grief that hadn't found its voice yet. He took a step toward me, then another. He walked like a man moving through deep water. "Pop," he croaked. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just watched him. He came closer until he was standing 5 feet away. He looked at my face, searching for something. Searching for the father who used to pick him up when he scraped his knee. Searching for the man who refinanced the house to pay for his college tuition. Searching for the safety net that had always been there. But the net was gone. I had cut it. Dante's knees buckled. It wasn't a choice. It was gravity. The weight of his shame pushed him down until he hit the mud. He knelt there, ruining his pants, oblivious to the wet, cold earth soaking into his skin. He bowed his head. His shoulders began to shake. "I am sorry," he sobbed. The sound was raw, ugly. It was the sound of a child who realizes too late that the vase is broken and can never be glued back together. I didn't know Pop. I didn't know she took money from 3 people. I swear to God. She told me it was just a bridge loan. She told me we would pay it back once the condos were built. I looked down at the top of his head. I saw the gray hairs starting to show. "You didn't know about the 3 investors," I said, my voice flat. "But you knew about the forgery. You knew about the hospital. You knew about the bulldozer." Dante looked up, his face streaked with tears and snot. "I was scared, Pop. We were drowning. The bookies. They were going to hurt us. Tiffany said it was the only way. She said you were old. She said you wouldn't notice. She said we would put you in the best facility money could buy." He reached out a hand to touch my shoe. I stepped back. "I only wanted what was best for you," he pleaded. His voice cracked on the word best. I thought, if we sold the land, you wouldn't have to worry about repairs anymore. You wouldn't be lonely. I thought it was a win-win. A win-win. I looked at the wreckage of my home. I looked at the hole in the earth where the water main had burst. I looked at the empty space where my front porch used to be. "You wanted what was best for me," I repeated. "Yes, Pop. I swear. I love you." I let out a breath I had been holding for days. It was a cold breath. "Get up, Dante," I said. He looked hopeful for a second. He struggled to his feet, wiping his hands on his jacket. "Pop, can we talk to the lawyers? Maybe if we explain that I didn't sign anything, maybe they can help me. Tiffany is gone. Pop, it is just us now. We can fix this." I shook my head slowly. "There is no we, Dante." He froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the man standing in front of me is a stranger," I said. "My son Dante died the day he let his wife sign my name on a piece of paper. My son Dante died the day he stood in my kitchen and lied to my face while marking my grave with survey stakes. No, Pop, don't say that Dante cried, reaching for me again." I slapped his hand away. It wasn't a violent slap. It was a dismissal, like shooing away a fly. "You didn't want what was best for me, Dante. You wanted what was easiest for you. You wanted the money without the work. You wanted the inheritance without the funeral." I stepped closer to him. I smelled the fear on him. It smelled like expensive cologne and rot. "You stood there," I said, pointing to the spot where the car had been. "You stood there and watched her scream at me. You watched the police pull a gun on me. You watched them handcuff me and shove me into a cage, and you said nothing. I was paralyzed," Dante whispered. "You made a choice," I said, cutting him off. "In this life, Dante, you don't get to ride the fence. When the storm comes, you have to choose a side. You chose her." I pointed down the road where the police car had disappeared. "You chose the woman who called you a coward. You chose the woman who blamed you for her crimes. You chose the woman who was willing to bury your father alive to buy a handbag. Pop, please. I made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash. I said, my voice rising for the first time. A mistake is leaving the lights on. This wasn't a mistake. This was a betrayal. It was a calculated, cold-blooded betrayal. I looked him in the eye. You swore an oath to her, Dante, forsaking all others. Well, congratulations. You kept your vow. You forsook me. You forsook your mother's memory. You forsook your own name. You forsook. Dante sobbed loudly, burying his face in his hands. But she is gone now, Pop. She is in jail. I am all alone. I buttoned my jacket. I adjusted my hat. You are not alone, I said. You have your consequences. They will keep you company. I turned away from him. I started walking toward Abernathy's car. Pop, wait! Dante screamed, running after me. Where are you going? What am I supposed to do? The investors. They will sue me. They will take everything. Who is going to protect me? I stopped. I didn't turn around. I spoke over my shoulder loud enough for the wind to carry the words back to him. You chose your wife over your father, Dante. You stood by her when she was winning. Now stand by her when she is losing. But she hates me. Dante wailed. Then let her hate you, I said. Go to the station. Hire her a lawyer. Pay her bail. Do whatever a good husband does, because you certainly don't know how to be a son. But Pop, who will protect me? I looked at the sky. It was clearing. The sun was coming out. Let your wife protect you, I said. I walked the rest of the way to the Lincoln. Abernathy had the engine running. He didn't say a word. He just unlocked the door. I got in. I shut the door. Through the window, I saw Dante standing in the middle of the road. He looked small. He looked like a speck of dust in the rearview mirror. Drive, Abernathy, I said. We pulled away. I didn't feel sad. I felt clean. I had cut off the dead limb. The tree would survive. As we turned the corner, I took the wedding ring off my finger. I rubbed it with my thumb. Sarah would have been heartbroken, I whispered. Abernathy looked at me. Sarah would have been proud, Zeke, he said. You didn't raise a bad son. You raised a man who made a bad choice. And today you taught him the price of that choice. That is parenting too. I nodded. Where to now, Zeke? To the hardware store, I said. I need a new shovel. I have a lot of mud to clean up. And as we drove away, leaving my son in the ruins of his own making, I knew that the hardest part was over. The demolition was done. Now it was time to rebuild. Alone, but standing tall. The last police cruiser disappeared around the bend, leaving a trail of red dust settling in the humid afternoon air. The EPA trucks had gone, leaving behind a perimeter of yellow caution tape and a heavy fine that was now glued to the front gate. The show was over. The audience had left. The only actors remaining on the stage were me and the man who used to be my son. Dante was sitting on the bumper of Tiffany's mud-spattered white BMW. He looked like a man who had survived a plane crash only to realize he was stranded on a desert island. His expensive suit was ruined. His face was buried in his hands. He was waiting for the handcuffs, waiting for the sirens to come back for him. I walked over to Abernathy's car. Abernathy was sitting in the driver's seat reviewing a document on a clipboard. He looked up at me and nodded. It was a grim nod. The kind of nod a doctor gives when the surgery is done and the patient lived but lost a limb. He handed me the clipboard and a pen. I took it. I walked across the ruined yard, my boots squelching in the red clay. I stopped in front of Dante. He looked up. His eyes were swollen. He looked terrified. Are they coming back for me, Pop? He whispered. Am I going to jail too? I looked down at him. Part of me wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted to let the law take its course. He was an accomplice. He knew about the forgery. He stood by while his wife committed elder abuse. A jury would convict him in an hour. But another part of me, the part that remembered teaching him to ride a bike, the part that remembered his small hand in mine, couldn't do it. I couldn't send my own blood to a cage, but I couldn't let him walk away free either. Freedom has a price. I held out the clipboard. Stand up, Dante. He stood up, his legs shaking. He looked at the paper. It was a dense legal document typed in single spacing. Abernathy had prepared it days ago, anticipating this moment. What is this? Dante asked. It is a deal, I said, my voice cold and steady. The police have Tiffany's confession on tape. She implicated you. She said you knew everything. That makes you a co-conspirator. That is 5 to 10 years in state prison, Dante. Dante started to weep again. Pop, please. I can't go to prison. I will die in there. I know, I said. That is why I am giving you a choice. I tapped the paper with the pen. I spoke to the district attorney before he left. I told him that if you cooperated, if you testified against Tiffany, and if the victim, that is me, refused to press charges against you, they would drop the case. Dante's face lit up with a desperate hope. You would do that. You would save me. Oh, thank you, Pop, thank you. I knew you loved me. I knew it. He reached out to hug me. I took a step back. Read the paper, Dante. He stopped. He wiped his eyes and looked at the document. He read the first paragraph, then the second. His face went pale. This says I voluntarily waive all rights to any future inheritance, he stammered. This says I am removed from your will. It says I have no claim to the land, the house, or any assets you possess now or in the future. That is correct, I said. And this part, he pointed to the bottom of the page. It says I am forbidden from entering this property ever again without written permission. It is a restraining order. I nodded. You want freedom, Dante. This is the cost. You wanted to sell this land so badly, well, now you will never have it. Not today. Not when I die. Never. Dante looked at me, his eyes wide with shock. But Pop, this is my birthright. You are disowning me. You disowned yourself, I said. You disowned yourself when you chose a thief over your father. You disowned yourself when you let her sign my name. I shoved the pen into his hand. Sign it, Dante. Sign it and you walk away. You go back to your life. You figure out how to pay your debts without my blood money. Or don't sign it and I call the detective back right now and tell him to turn the car around. He looked at the pen. He looked at the road where the police had gone. He looked at the house, or what was left of it. He realized then that I wasn't bluffing. He realized that the father he thought was a soft touch, the old man he thought he could manipulate, was gone. In his place was a man of stone. He took the clipboard. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. He pressed the tip to the paper. He signed his name, Dante Robinson. It was done. He handed the clipboard back to me. He looked like he wanted to say something. Maybe he wanted to say sorry again. Maybe he wanted to beg. But he looked at my eyes and saw nothing there for him. Go, I said. He turned around. He got into the white BMW. It was covered in mud inside and out. He started the engine. He didn't look back. He drove away down the street past the neighbors who were watching from their porches. He drove out of my life. I watched him go until the car was just a speck. I felt a heavy weight lift off my chest. It wasn't happiness, it was relief. The rot was gone. I walked back to Abernathy. I handed him the clipboard. File it, I said. Abernathy took it. He didn't say anything. He just squeezed my arm. I am going to head home, Zeke, he said. Do you need a ride? No, I said. I have work to do. Abernathy nodded. He understood. He got in his Lincoln and drove away, leaving me alone. Truly alone. I turned to face the yard. It was a disaster. The red clay was churned up into a quagmire. The crater from the water main break was gaping like a wound. Debris was scattered everywhere. Broken wood pieces of the fence trash from the investors' party. And the leaves were everywhere. The wind had blown them back over the mud, mixing with the trash, creating a chaotic mess. I walked to the shed. The door was hanging off its hinges, but my tools were still there. I reached in and grabbed my old rake. The wooden handle was smooth, worn down by decades of use. It felt like an extension of my arm. I walked to the center of the yard. 3 days ago, a stranger told me, don't rake the leaves. I listened. I waited. I fought. But now the war was over, and it was time to clean up the battlefield. I dug the tines of the rake into the wet earth. I pulled. The heavy wet leaves dragged through the mud. It was hard work. My shoulders burned. My hip ached. But I didn't stop. I raked with a rhythm. Pull, step, pull, step. I raked away the debris of the party. I raked away the plastic cups and the soggy napkins. I raked away the broken pieces of the porch lattice. And then I saw it. Sticking out of the mud near the old pecan tree was a flash of orange. I stopped. I walked over to it. It was one of Tiffany's survey stakes. Lot B. I reached down and grabbed it with both hands. I pulled. The mud sucked at it, trying to hold on, but I was stronger. With a grunt, I ripped it out of the earth. I held it in my hand, a piece of painted wood, a lie made solid. I threw it onto the pile of dry brush I had collected. I kept raking. I found the second stake near the fence, Lot A. I ripped it out. I found the third one near the driveway, Lot C. I ripped it out. And finally, I found the fourth one, the one buried deep near the foundation, Lot D. I pulled it out. I threw it onto the pile. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the yard. I struck a match. The flame flared up bright and clean. I tossed it onto the pile of brush and stakes. The wood caught fire quickly. The orange paint blistered and blackened. The yellow flagging tape curled and melted. I stood there, leaning on my rake, watching the fire burn. The smoke rose up into the evening sky, carrying away the greed, the betrayal, and the lies. I looked at the ground I had cleared. It was scarred, it was muddy, it was ugly. But it was mine. Every square inch of it, from the road to the fence, from the sky to the bedrock. It belonged to Ezekiel Robinson. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of wood smoke and wet earth. "I am still here," I whispered to the fire. I looked at the spot where the porch used to be. I would rebuild it. I would mix the concrete myself. I would lay the boards myself. It would take time. It would take money I didn't really have. But I would do it, because a man doesn't abandon his post just because the roof caves in. I watched the last of the orange stakes crumble into ash. I turned my back on the fire and looked toward the street. The neighborhood was quiet. The lights were coming on in the houses. Life was going on. I was 72 years old. I had no furniture. I had a broken house, and I had no family left. But as I stood there, gripping my rake, I felt a strange strength rising in my legs. I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor. And tomorrow I would start planting. Not condos, but seeds. I would plant a garden that would cover these scars, and I would sit on my new porch and watch it grow. I am Ezekiel Robinson, and I am home. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but when they finally crush you, they grind you into dust. It took 6 months for Tiffany's trial to conclude. I was there every day, sitting in the back row wearing my best suit. I watched as her high-priced defense team crumbled under the weight of the evidence Abernathy and I had gathered. The forged signature, the secret recordings, the multiple deposits. It was a mountain of greed that buried her. When the judge read the sentence, Tiffany didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared at the wall, her eyes empty and dead. 5 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, real estate fraud, and elder abuse. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the investors, which meant seizing every asset she had. The white BMW, the condo, the designer clothes. Everything was auctioned off to pay for her crimes. She walked out of that courtroom in a beige jumpsuit, handcuffed to a stranger, leaving behind a life she had stolen but could not keep. I didn't feel happy seeing her go. I felt a grim sense of balance. The scales had tipped back. The universe was correcting itself. As for Dante, his sentence was different. He didn't go to prison thanks to the deal I signed, but he built his own prison. The investors sued him, of course. He declared bankruptcy. He lost his license to practice architecture. The last time I saw him was a Tuesday. I was driving my truck down 10th Street and I stopped at the Suds and Shine for a wash. I saw a man in a blue jumpsuit wiping down the rims of a Mercedes. He was hunched over, scrubbing with a frantic energy. He looked older. His hair was thinning and he had lost weight. It was Dante, my son. The architect who used to design skyscrapers was now cleaning the mud off other people's tires. He looked up as I drove past. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just nodded. A small, humble acknowledgement of the distance between us. I nodded back and kept driving. I didn't stop. I didn't offer him money. A man has to walk the path he carved for himself, even if that path is covered in soap suds and regret. I turned my attention back to the only thing that mattered, my home. Rebuilding wasn't easy. The insurance money came through eventually, but it wasn't enough to hire a big crew. So I did it the old-fashioned way. I called in favors. I called the guys I used to work with on the sites back in the 80s. Men with gray hair and bad backs, but hands that knew how to frame a wall. We worked on weekends. We worked in the rain. Abernathy was there too. He couldn't lift a hammer, but he was the best project manager I ever had. He sat on a crate with a clipboard, ordering materials, yelling at suppliers, ensuring every nail was driven straight. We were two old men refusing to fade away. By spring, the porch was back. It was wider this time, stronger. I painted it white myself, the smell of fresh paint mixing with the scent of blooming dogwood. But the yard needed a new purpose. I didn't plant grass. I didn't want a manicured lawn that needed to be protected. I wanted life. I went to the city council. I showed them the deed. I told them I wanted to designate my side lot, the infamous Lot B, as a private park open to the public. They approved it. I built a swing set. I built a sandbox. I built a climbing frame made of sturdy cedar logs. I planted wildflowers along the fence line. And then I got a roommate. I found him behind the hardware store shivering in a cardboard box. He was a mutt. Part shepherd, part who knows what. He had one ear that stood up and one that flopped down. He looked like he had been through a war. I looked at him and said, "You look like I feel." I took him home. I named him Barnaby. He wasn't a purebred. He wouldn't win any shows. But he was loyal. He sat on the porch with me, his head resting on my boot, watching the world go by. Now on Sunday afternoons, my yard isn't quiet. It is filled with the sound of children screaming and laughing. The kids from the neighborhood, the ones whose parents work 2 jobs, the ones who have nowhere else to play, they come here. They run on the grass. They dig in the sandbox. They swing until their feet touch the sky. I sit on my rocking chair, Barnaby at my feet, and I drink my iced tea. Abernathy comes over, usually bringing a bag of donuts. We watch the kids play. You know, Zeke Abernathy said to me last week, wiping sugar off his chin, "Tiffany would hate this." I smiled. She would, I agreed. She would say it is noisy. She would say it brings down the property value. She would say it is messy. I looked at a little girl pushing her brother on the swing, but she was wrong, Abernathy. This didn't bring down the value. It increased it. Because the value of land isn't in the price per square foot. It is in the memories you build on it. Abernathy nodded. You rooted yourself, Zeke. Just like Sarah said. I looked at the oak tree. The birdhouse with the camera was gone. In its place was a real birdhouse, and a family of blue jays had moved in. I rooted myself, I said, and I grew something new. The sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the playground. The parents started calling their kids home for dinner. The laughter faded, leaving behind a peaceful silence. Not the lonely silence of an empty house, but the satisfied silence of a day well lived. I stood up and stretched. My hips still ached, but it was a good ache. "Come on, Barnaby," I said to the dog. "Let's go inside. I think there is a steak in the fridge with your name on it." I walked into my house. My home. It wasn't the same house I had before. It was different. It had scars. It had stories. But it was standing. And so was I. My name is Ezekiel Robinson. I am 73 years old. I have lost a wife. I have lost a son. But I found my voice. And I learned that you are never too old to fight for your dignity. You are never too old to start over. And you are never, ever too old to teach the world a lesson it won't forget. Reflection. We often think that silence in the elderly is a sign of weakness or senility. We assume that because their steps are slow, their minds are too. But I learned that silence is often where wisdom sharpens its blade. My son thought my legacy was just dirt and grass to be monetized. He forgot that the land holds memory, and so do I. You cannot plant seeds of betrayal and expect to harvest fruit. In the end, dignity isn't something your children give you. It's something you keep for yourself, even if it means standing alone against the ones you raised. This is the story of how I saved my home and lost my son, and why I would do it all again. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments, have you ever had to stand your ground against family? I read every single comment. Until next time, stay strong, stay rooted, and never let anyone take what is yours.